It's less than an hour to midnight on October 30th, 1995, one of the most stressful and divisive nights in Canada's history. This is Jacques Parizeau. He's the Premier of Quebec, the governor in American terms. His party currently holds a majority government over the province of Quebec and has for the past year, but following today's events, this will be his last day as leader. Tomorrow he's going to resign.
Je libérerai les postes de Premier ministre.
Why is that? Well, because tonight he's just lost a referendum, the second of its kind in this province. And worse, he's lost by a shockingly small margin, failing to get the result that he wanted, the one that people have been waiting 15 years since the last referendum to try to get again.
Chers amis, si je vous ai bien compris, vous êtes en train de dire à la prochaine fois.
With the highest ever voter turnout in Quebec's history, the province is divided right down the middle. In percentages, 49.5% voted oui, yes, and 50.5% voted no, no, to the question, acceptez-vous que le Québec devienne souverain? Do you agree that Quebec should become sovereign? Should Quebec become its own nation, claim independence tonight, and separate from Canada? At the time, no one knew this, but had the vote gone differently, there were plans for an invasion by Canadian Special Forces stationed near the border, ready to swoop in and seize federal property in the event of separation. If about just 0.5% of people voted the other way, things would have gotten very, very interesting. But it didn't turn out that way, and so Jacques Parizeau is on TV now about to address his non-nation about the results. Tensions are as high as they can possibly be. The crowd before him is emotionally distraught. It's been a long, tiring campaign. It's all anybody's talked about in this province for the past 15 years. And to have come so close to miss it by barely a tick, people are simultaneously proud and devastated. Parizeau's had two different speeches prepared, his delivery of each dependent on the outcome of tonight's vote, and now, in order to process and declare the very tight defeat, he's supposed to read from the version he'd rather not. Except, as you might know if you're familiar with this story, that's not actually what he's about to do. Instead, he's going to make a big mistake. He's about to go off script, express his feelings candidly to the entire province watching, and he's going to utter one sentence that no matter how hard he'd try for the rest of his life, he'd never be able to distance himself from. You see, tonight Parizeau isn't just going to address this failed bid at sovereignty. No, he's tired, he's disappointed, and you know what? Maybe he's even feeling a bit vindictive. He's up there, and he's gonna tell everyone exactly who he thinks took it from them. He is about to blame someone.
C'est vrai qu'on a été battu au fond par quoi? Par l'argent puis des votes ethniques, essentiellement.
It's the end of the 1995 Quebec Referendum, and the ethnics of Quebec have just been publicly called out, live on TV in front of everyone, for blocking them from claiming their independence. And I say it that way because, as the speech would continue, the ethnocentric line drawn, which up until this point in the campaign was something the party was trying hard to disown, would keep getting retraced thicker and thicker.
Hey, si vous voulez, on va cesser de parler des francophones du Québec, voulez-vous? On va parler de nous. À 60%, on a voté pour. Alors, ça veut dire que la prochaine fois, au lieu d'être 60 ou 61% à voter oui, on sera 63 ou 64, et ça s'ira. C'est tout. N'oubliez jamais, les 3/5 de ce que nous sommes ont voté oui. C'était pas tout à fait assez, mais bientôt ça sera assez. Notre pays, on l'aura! L'indépendance du Québec reste le ciment entre nous. Nous voulons un pays et nous l'aurons!
For the most part, people on both sides were really displeased with this. On the no side, well, because they cast the ethnic votes, and on the we side, for feeling embarrassed, suddenly having their vote associated with a leader's discriminatory remark. Most people on both sides were pleased when he stepped down the next day, but for others, it definitely served as this grand moment of validation. People who may have once felt that they needed to keep their ethno-nationalist view of Quebec private now had reassurance. I mean, come on, the premier said it on TV, it's those damn dirty ethnics, that's what's wrong with the province.
I used words that were strong, last night. But they underline a reality that exists.
I suppose it's comparable to the effect a lot of Trump's speeches had on closeted wingnuts in the States during his campaign. For people on the fringes of society with stinky ideas, hearing someone speak their language on TV is definitely empowering. To everyone in Quebec, it was very clear from the moment the word left his mouth who Parizeau meant by ethnics. Not that he needed to, but years later he would clarify that he was specifically referring to Italian, Greek, and Jewish people whose political coalition was extremely active against the movement to separate.
Du Front commun, du Congrès italien, grec et juif, qui avait une activité politique extraordinaire contre dans le camp du Nord, avec un succès formidable.
I should mention to his credit, he did make this clarification during an interview in 2013 where he came out against the current Parti Québécois plan to create a religious symbols ban, the same one that has today become a reality in the form of the often critiqued and currently challenged Bill 21. The reason you might have heard that one news story that broke out into American media about it where a public school teacher in Quebec was fired for wearing a head covering last year.
How would you explain this situation to the kids who are very upset to lose their teacher?
Okay, first, the school board should have not hired this person in the first place as a teacher, given Bill 21. Employees in positions of authority, including teachers, should not wear religious symbols while on duty.
It seems like towards the end of his life, Parizeau realized that pushing minorities around wasn't a very good idea, or at least not a good look. And it's worth noting, it seems like he learned his lesson and he tried warning the current leadership of his party about it. But what am I saying? Forget about all this. For now, it's still October 30th, 1995, and I am just over a year old, and I am two of those kinds of ethnics. And I'm also dressed as a Dalmatian because the next day is coincidentally Halloween and my parents had no taste. Anyways, hello, that's me. Now what, you might like to ask, the fuck does any of this have to do with the critically acclaimed action roguelike dungeon crawler Hades by Supergiant Games? Well, see, I haven't played Hades. Not just because I haven't gotten around to it yet, but because I've earnestly tried avoiding it. And before you assume it has anything to do with a fault in the game, let me reassure you, it has more to do with a fault in myself than anything else. Most of this is going to be extremely petty and personal, and I know I shouldn't expect anyone to understand or relate, but I'm going to try anyways, because I think there's something to learn from my perspective, despite the very niche circumstances and French-Canadian incubation that have formed it. Though, I will say it does have something to do with why I'm standing outside the Ubisoft Montreal building right now. I don't actually know if you can see it. I'll get some B-roll later, because I think the camera's focused on me, but, we'll get it done. But for now, yeah, no, I haven't played Hades, and I'm not really going to talk much about the game itself in this video, so if that's what you're looking for, feel free to bounce right now. I haven't played it, I'm also not looking to have it recommended to me, but I'd still like to explain why by exploring myself, my city, and my identity. One last little disclaimer though, I'm about to talk about really sensitive subject matter, in particular diversity and multiculturalism, but given my givens, I'm going to talk about them in a very local way that might sound different than you're used to hearing if you're like the majority of my audience. If you're also from here though, and especially if you'd be classified as ethnic too, then no big deal. I'm going to be hitting the same notes you've been hearing people hit since you were a kid. To others, I would warn against applying an American lens to this conversation because that's not what this is going to be. In my experience, outsiders just always get Quebec wrong because there's too much implicit background they're missing, and it's not their fault. But what I'm saying is, even though this video comes to you from just 45 minutes north of the border, it comes from a place where, take my word for it, a lot more than just the street signs would be unfamiliar to you. So please try to remember that. If you already trust me though, you can skip straight ahead straight to the next timestamp, no problem. Let me make myself clear though, in case the whole referendum bit wasn't a strong enough start for you. Diversity is something that I value a lot. Diversity is something that I literally represent where I'm from. Christ, I'm an ethnic Canadian liberal from Quebec. Cards on the table, I voted for Jagmeet's party once, and I would have done it again if he stood a chance in my riding. But to get where I'm ultimately trying to go in this video, I'm actually going to make the case against a particular implementation of multicultural representation in just a moment. First of all, that doesn't mean that I'm against diversity in general. It means that I think that this one case of it is actually not cool, and as I'll argue later, actually harms the cause more than it does good. I'm not about to go all fucking diversity versus authenticity. I'm not going to be one of those fucking numbskull gamers who complains about women or amputees or women amputees in war games. It's fucking Battlefield. Who gives a shit, man? No, I'm going to talk about stuff that hits a little bit closer to home, but in a way that might seem unusual because of where my home is. So please receive this with an open mind. Because yes, I'm Greek, but like I said, I'm also Canadian, and I'm also from Quebec. And if you haven't noticed yet how careful I've been not to call myself Québécois out of respect to a culture that, I'll be the first to admit, I'm not entitled to say I'm from, that's part of this context I'm talking about. And yeah, I'm saying I don't expect my audience to understand, so yes, I know it'd be ridiculous of me to expect a game developer from San Francisco to accommodate to my particular sensitivities around diversity and multiculturalism. Canadians and Americans have fundamentally different ideas of it, to the point that, like, we're the first country in the world to have adopted multiculturalism as an official policy, and it's taught differently to us in schools because of that. That's why, no, I don't expect an American studio to make something that caters to my needs. The locals, though, given our shared history, I do expect that of them, and so far, they haven't failed me. I promise we will get to this soon. I keep slipping in the snow. I'm gonna take a spill here. Get knocked out in front of Ubisoft. Mediocre video game YouTuber trips and falls and dies outside of Ubisoft office 2022. Fucking do a leap of faith into the fucking snow and kill myself. But on the topic of diversity, which, again, is something I value, what I need to say, and I can understand if people disagree with this, but I think it's okay to be disappointed in something you believe is good. I think it's okay to say, hey, I know this is good, I know this is progress, but it isn't making me feel good right now. Just because you agree that something makes sense and you know it's a positive thing doesn't mean you still can't be saddened or even upset by it. You can know and agree that progress is good without it feeling good to you. And that's when I think sharing your perspective, challenging those you think are performing at the bare minimum, and outlining alternatives for them matters. That's going to be the goal of my exercise, and in the end, you can decide whether you think I did a good job expressing my feelings or if I just dug myself into a hole. And I, back, can decide whether or not I think you actually listened and empathized and understood. Look, my intent isn't to make you feel bad for having fun with Hades. If you enjoyed the game, there's nothing wrong with that. Even after hearing my spiel, you can still like the game. I'm not trying to shame anyone or say that my Big Fat Greek take is the take. I'm just trying to express that my take is a take. A well-reasoned and well-felt take. To me, at least. Above all else, I hope it's not an entitled take. I'm basically trying really hard not to be a Greek Angry Joe here. I think that if Supergiant Games really prized diversity and wanted to show that they truly do care about it, they wouldn't have needed to go as far as they did with Hades. If it actually mattered to them, then there's an easier answer they should have arrived at first. An answer to the question, how do we show a commitment to multicultural representation in a game set in the world of Greek myth? Instead of picking the overly complex solution that they did, and then barely even delivering on it, they could have, and I wish they had, dared to be the first ever video game to finally let the Greek gods be Greek. Hades is not the first game to set itself in the world of Greek mythology. From the heights of Mount Olympus to the depths of Tartarus and everything in between, game developers since the birth of this medium have realized that these worlds, these heroes and gods that inhabit them, and these abilities and ancient magical artifacts that they use lend themselves really well to gamification. In possibly the most well-known example, the God of War series, the designers cleverly flavored different iconic mythical items as tools for the player to use in gameplay. In the first game, after defeating Medusa, her severed head can be used to stun enemies and turn them to stone. In the second game, you kill Icarus for his wings, and then you can use them to glide after a jump. They See a lot of use in the platforming sections. And of course, in the third game, after separating Hermes from his legs, you steal his shoes and then can use them to run fast and sprint along walls. Sometimes elements of the stories themselves make them into the game and influence certain levels, scenarios, or boss battles. In God of War 2, there's a boss fight against Perseus, who uses his cap of invisibility to disappear. There's a nifty little gimmick where you have to watch for his footsteps in the water to spot him. In the third title, they came up with one of my favorite examples of the popular bag of spilling tropes from gaming. You know, the one where at the start of a game the character somehow loses all the abilities you acquired in the prequel. Here in the opening, they actually do start you off with all of Kratos' shit from the end of the second game, but once he's betrayed by the Titans and falls into the River Styx, a bunch of lost souls cling to him, rip off all his gear, and permanently sap his health bar. Lost souls that are only there because in the previous game, Kratos killed Charon, the ferryman of the dead. As the game goes on, you eventually get new gear and powers, but they're not replacements, they're not the same ones you started out with / ended the previous game with. The stuff you get here is brand new, and that makes this whole intro section where they bothered implementing the previous game's powers all the more special. There's a permanence to the very gamey start of the game depowering that's tied really neatly to the world and myths. But aside from these few exceptions to the norm, the source material doesn't get explored too deeply. Often things or characters just show up without as much deliberacy. Why does Prometheus have Apollo's bow, and why does it shoot fire? Hell if I know. They probably just wanted you to have a cool bow that shoots fire, and this was when they wanted to give it to you. The Greek artifacts that become items, Greek worlds that become levels, and Greek gods who become prey, their sole utility is to cover up the underlying gamey systems. God of War is just Mega Man. You kill a bunch of bad guys in their homes, steal their abilities, and you move on to the next. And so one thing that disappointingly never ends up being explored in any of these very gamey games is Greekness, or Greek identity. They basically just take elements of Greek culture out of their original context and spread them atop their gameplay. Why do they do that then? It's kind of funny. It's a lot like how some games these days will set themselves in like deeply complex settings and just say, you know, actually we're not interested in covering anything political, and we all know that's bullshit. By setting a game in Greek culture, it's kind of the same thing. You're not allowed to claim you're not trying to say anything about Greekness, you're just, putting your game in that setting. And omitting saying anything about it is a message in and of itself. I get it. To you, Greek culture is forgettable, it's erasable, it's rewritable. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Why do so many developers use this setting then? Why are we constantly being brought back to the worlds of Greek myth if nobody's actually interested in exploring Greekness? Well, because it's the ultimate form of outsourcing. Greek myth is used by games like God of War and Hades as an aesthetic or springboard. Think about it. It's a lot harder to invent a whole new fictional world and convince an audience to care about it than it is to just boilerplate off Greek myth, something most people are expected to have a base level knowledge of anyways from other media they've consumed. So they set the story in Greek myth and outsource the job of world building to the rest of the world. Your history teachers who might have talked about it in school, or people who've made movies, TV shows, books, and other games you've played set in it. Aside from, the city of New York, I can't think of another setting as overused for no good reason as ancient Greece. Most Westerners, I think it's fair to say, have a pretty good model in their head of what this setting entails. With all the world building outsourced, game developers can focus on the story they really want to tell. Greekness to them is a style, a shortcut, a means to an end. To many storytellers, it's the path of least resistance to getting their audience invested. And typically, the stories told in these Greek template settings are as far from Greek as can be. Most game developers seem to have come to a consensus that Greek myth can be easily separated from Greek people. Later I'll talk about why that's actually not really the case and sort of dismissive and lazy, research-wise. But for now, just please accept that Greek myth has connections to the entirety of Hellenism, including identity. It's linked to the history, the practices, even the modern ones, the geography, and yeah, the ethnicity too. That's why, as a Greek person, it's kind of disappointing to never see Greek people exhibiting Greek values or acting distinctly Greek in games that take place in our worlds. Creators are happy to step off Greekness to market and sell their games as something special, but aren't dedicated enough to actually explore it. Like I said, to me it's like making a game about a world conflict and deciding that actually it's not political. It's a cop-out. In the whole God of War series, there's only one character moment that ever stood out to me where anyone actually does anything authentically Greek. You'd think, with 4 mainline games and countless spin-offs, this would be the place to look for representation. Anyways, that moment is in the 4th game, where Kratos finds wine from his hometown and shares it with his son. Yeah, I had to stretch. Giving alcohol to a minor is the Greekest thing Kratos does in any of these freaking games. That's why Kratos isn't Kratos. He's Kratos. He's a big Hulk whose only reason for being Greek is that David Jaffe, the game series director, figured it'd help the game sell more, which, yeah, it did. Gaming's most iconic Greek character. You'd expect him to be at least a little Greek, right? It's like if Mario didn't have a mustache and a funny accent, he was still supposed to be Italian. This dude's no better Greek representation than
Joe Bidenopoulos.
As Jaffe's explained in interviews, his main goal for Kratos wasn't to be a traditional iconic Greek hero. It was to create someone who looked brutal and violent, and whose design would let the player know at a glance that this guy was a conduit to unleash their dark side. Whatever that means. The desire to make Kratos look and act nasty and impulsive superseded not just historical accuracy, but faithfulness to the source material, the myths themselves. In other words, the Greek setting had nothing to do with the developer's main goal of making a violent power fantasy game. Greekness was just set dressing, the background, and they were only committed to it so far as it didn't get in the way of their real intent. Kratos isn't Greek, and God of War isn't set in Greece because it matters to his character or to the story. He's there because it saves them the world-building effort. A direct quote in my best attempt at a David Jaffe impression. So while you look at this guy and he may not feel totally at home in ancient Greece from a costume standpoint, I think he achieves the greater purpose, which is to give players a character who they can play and who really does let them go nuts and unleash the nasty fantasies they have in their heads. In other words, God of War is not a game about Greek mythology. It has, as he says, a greater purpose. It's an action game about violence and destruction. It could have been set in any world, one homemade, one licensed, one from the public domain. The Greek stuff is just shallow fluff, as usual. And so Kratos isn't Greek as far as his identity goes. He's just violent. As a Greek person, it means literally nothing to me that Kratos is supposed to be Greek. Outside of one joke moment in the fourth game, his character is never used to explore our common identity. He's an American-made foreign action hero. He's a violent brute and he's uncivilized. Sure, he's got male pattern baldness, the Greekest nose I've ever seen, he doesn't know how to relate to his kid, but other than that, he's got nothing to do with being Greek, and he means absolutely nothing to me. Tipota. Then what would make a Greek character good? What needs to be there for a character to actually represent someone of this heritage? Well, that's the thing. I don't know why all these creators have been having so much trouble with it, because Greeks have basically packaged all their virtues, everything that defines them, into one neat little word that all you need to do to write an accurate Greek character is have them display it. Philotimo. It's a word that doesn't really have a strict meaning, as it's just kind of understood by most people who've heard it. It encompasses friendship, pride, honor, generosity, and self-sacrifice. It's what drives people to do good for the sake of doing good, to help others not because the outcome might work out in their favor, but because doing good is always worth doing. It's what motivates people to take pride in the things they do, suggesting that anything requiring effort is worth being proud of. And of course, it's something that points both inwards and outwards. Philotimo is something to encourage and recognize in others and honor them for exhibiting. It often goes hand in hand with, personally, what I think is a more important virtue, philoxenia. In ancient times, it was understood that hospitality towards strangers was a moral obligation, not a choice. Philoxenia is basically the Greek equivalent to the golden rule. The quality originates from ancient myths, ones depicting theoxenia, stories where a wandering stranger arrives, people greet them and show them overwhelming hospitality, and then the stranger is revealed to actually be a god in disguise, granting their mortal hosts gifts and blessings as rewards for passing their test. In Greek culture for thousands of years, it's been understood that foreigners and outsiders, xeni, are to be venerated and taken in like family. And once again, it goes the other way around too. Greek hospitality is about being a good host, but also being a good guest. It's why my papu is the world's biggest fan of Tim Hortons. I never visited anyone without picking up a box of donuts and a coffee first. It's the same reason I still try to never show up to anyone's place empty-handed. It's a quality that's been conditioned into me and everyone who's come before me for thousands of years. It's why we shout Oppa when the waiter drops a plate or shatters a glass. We turn their accident into a cause for celebration, not worth letting them feel ashamed or embarrassed for making a mistake while hosting us. It's the rules. It's what we do. It's our nature, practically. These virtues are the reason, to outsiders, Greek people are sometimes perceived as loud and obnoxious. They're the reason, if you've ever stayed particularly late at a Greek restaurant, at some point the owner probably came out with shots of ouzo, fresh kumades, and maybe a buddy with a bouzouki, and of course, at the end of the night, you never saw any of that on your bill. Greeks just want to have fun with anyone willing. They do it to honor themselves, to honor where they came from, and to honor their guests. Kratos? This man is the most selfish, cocky, untrusting, rude to strangers asshole I've ever seen. His archetype, the strong, angry man, is the inverse of what people should think of when they think of a Greek, a modern one or an ancient one. He shouldn't be a guy with a temper. He should be someone who's hard to offend, with a fuse from here to Timbuktu. He shouldn't be a judgmental jackass to every stranger he meets. He shouldn't be a disrespectful guest when he's invited to people's homes. He shouldn't be any of the things he is. I can't pick out a single thing about him that lines up with the two most critical Greek virtues. And you know what? To me, that's a failure. That's a mistake. He's a contradiction to the culture he's supposed to come from, and whether or not their intent represents. Nobody would invite this malaka to Easter, come on. And yeah, I know, I already solved this mystery earlier. He's not Greek because they wanted him to be, he just had to be so that they could set the game in these familiar worlds and sell more copies.
And then there was a sense of, brutality and violence, frankly, is something that a lot of gamers that sort of embrace this genre like, and we were kind of like, well, what if we kind of mix that with Greek mythology? I could show everybody videos of Russell Crowe and Romper Stomper till the fucking cows come home. But I did. I said, you see how he's slamming this guy's head into the bar? And I went to him and I said, do a version of Kratos like Ed Norton from American History X when he was the Nazi, right? Because he was just so, he's a Nazi, but in terms of his physique, that scene where he curb stomps that guy and he's like, ah, and it's like, holy shit, he's badass, And so he kind of did, it didn't look like Ed Norton, but it had that vibe.
But fuck, at this point they've had 4 games to come up with the idea, hey, what if we actually made Kratos a little bit Greek, and they haven't yet. So, to me, I'm sorry, that's just ridiculous.
To me, it's kind of sad that the aspects that I feel like matter the most about my culture are typically those that storytellers, especially game developers, let fall to the cutting room floor first. And the consequence of that is that the general public that consumes media tends to not know about them. I remember being a kid and someone at school asking if I was Greek. My name is a dead giveaway. And then poking and prodding me, asking me all sorts of questions about ancient myth that I didn't know the answers to because I didn't know at the time. Mythology was something I only got into later. So then I'd quiz them back. I'd ask them about Greek words, foods, practices, and they'd draw a blank like it didn't even matter. Like what I thought Greekness was incorrect because it wasn't what they thought it was. One time a substitute teacher was reading off the attendance sheet and asked me if I knew where my name came from. When I said I was named after my grandfather, she just laughed at me. I knew I was named after my grandfather and he after his and so on and so forth, and I knew that originally the name came from mythology, but I didn't know what it was, so whatever. But now, teacher thinks I'm an idiot, class thinks I'm an idiot. Thanks a lot. One kid even told me, and I'm still associated with this person, so I'm being careful in the event they ever see this, but they told me that I must just not really be Greek, because the elements of my culture that they knew and that mattered to them, which was mostly shit they got from God of War, weren't important to me. I had similar experiences with other kids, and then you squeeze it out of them, you always find out it's because they're into some Greek god game or show or movie or some shit. Nobody wants to hear about your Percy Jackson fanfics, okay? That's not important to discuss it.
Instead of the parts that matter, everyone knows the Greek iconography, the aesthetic, maybe some of the gods, the heroes, or the laws of the world. Maybe they know about how if you cut off the head of an Hydra, it'll grow back more, or if you stare into the eyes of a Gorgon, you'll turn to stone. Congrats, you're so smart, buddy. You're an honorary Greek now. Come on. No, as familiar as people are with the surface-level attributes of Greek myth and culture, everyone's missing the point. To me, that's a sure sign that, especially in games, but in other media too, nobody's actually done this world, these characters, how this genre, justice. Because I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. The point of Greek mythology isn't just the content of its stories, it's the context in which they exist. It's the fact that they are stories. And what matters most is what they reveal about the people and societies who felt so compelled to tell them. What's important to remember is that back then, Greek mythology wasn't what it is today. Comparable to like a comic book or cinematic universe with a goofy cast of characters. No, it was one part of a major world religion. It couldn't be reasoned about like we do in the present without considering also the system of beliefs and worship that it was related to. And even though the exact faith that these myths were the lore of is so far dead that Californians are making video games about it, it still matters to some people. Ancient Greek virtues are still very much part of the culture, first of all. That hasn't changed.
But also, despite the modern Greeks having sustained a conversion to Christianity, I think outsiders to this heritage would be surprised to know just how much the form of orthodoxy they practice has retained from the old, straight-up pagan practices. Eastern Christian Orthodoxy, and Greek Orthodoxy in particular, is scary to other kinds of Christians because it wasn't so much a clean conversion as it was an adaptation of existing pagan practices targeted at Zeus and his pantheon, now to Christ and his holy entourage instead. We'll talk some more about this later, don't you worry, but for now the point is that what it's meant throughout the past couple of thousands of years to be Greek, to share in this culture, hasn't changed that much, I think. That goes for those still in the country of origin and others like me spread apart in this grander diaspora. And what's strange is most people, non-subscribers to it, assume it has changed for some reason.
Despite focusing on games so far, this isn't an issue unique to that form of media. The bar for accurate Greek representation in films is set so low it might as well not even exist. When Greeks get a spot on the big screen, and I mostly mean Greek characters, not Greek people, they tend to be in one of three forms. First, in historical or mythological settings, often played by white actors in funny togas speaking in British accents. Now, briefly, and I'll get a little deeper into this later, I promise, but since I can't assume everyone is as familiar with this type of personhood as I, it might not be a given to you that some ethnically Greek people are visibly brown. I am far from the first person in history to note this, and also, not always in a positive or diversity-forward light, but I also wouldn't be surprised if this is the first time you're hearing this. Part of the reason for the whiteness-brownness spectrum Greeks exist on is that, given the Middle Eastern influence in terms of straight-up genetics, some Greeks literally are just brown people, non-negotiable. A couple of centuries as a Turkish colony will do that to you. And there's nothing wrong with that, that's just how things turned out. The issue is more that most people I've met in my life are unaware of that aspect of Greek identity. I mean, I call myself Greek, but part of my own Greek side is actually Middle Eastern. Like many Greeks, my family tree has some roots running through present-day Istanbul. My yaya, as a result, might have been a little bit more Arabic or Turkish than she was ever willing to admit. That complicates things quickly, you know? What the fuck does that make me? Am I European or am I Middle Eastern? For others, it's less of a question. Some Greeks are literally just people who, had they been born somewhere else, would be considered brown to the rest of the world. But the other part is more of a cultural thing. Race isn't and hasn't always been perceived the same way as it is in America around the rest of the world. To make matters more complicated, the strange ways olive skin reacts to the sun makes these people, like myself, tough to classify.
I'm going to show you something absolutely shocking right now. So this is my first ever learner's permit. I got this when I was 16 years old. It's basically what allowed me to drive with the presence of an adult in a vehicle for the purposes of practice and learning and whatever. And this is my first real deal driver's license, taken 16 months after my learner's permit. You might be wondering what the cause of the difference in appearances is, and also this isn't edited or any way. This is exactly how my licenses appear, and neither of them has faded with age. I keep them in the same place so that they're not susceptible to sun bleaching. This is these are my two driver's licenses, and the difference is that this one was taken in the middle of a Canadian winter, a sort of climate that my ancestors never knew even existed, and this one in the middle of summer after I mowed a lot of lawns. If I showed you these out of context, you wouldn't even think these people were related, let alone the same fucking person. What the fuck? The people I came from, more often than not, lived in climates that made them look like this, not so much this. My papu may as well have been the first person in my lineage to learn that we could get this pale in the absence of sun, and I'm not even as dark as Greeks sometimes come, which is crazy to think about.
That's why in some white Anglo-Saxon Protestant colonial countries, for the sake of voting, working, and immigration, Greeks were historically classified as semi-colored or otherwise non-white people, which, again, is maybe why it's not a great look for an Australian actor to be playing a Greek hero, you know? Sensitivity warning, but it might be interesting to know the Nazi perspective on the Greek ethnicity too, since it's what informed a lot of these takes. And I know this might be confusing, honestly I've been confused by it too, but it's worth bringing up in any discussion of how diverse Greekness really is given the current political climate we live in. I'm aware that many people's most recent exposure these days to Greek iconography might be in seeing white supremacist groups in the United States wearing Spartan helmets sporting Greek-related tattoos, real asshat shit. See, this stuff comes straight from the Nazi playbook. It's a cheap, unfounded way for white supremacists to gain legitimacy by claiming a connection to the classics. You can see this all over the propaganda material for the 1936 German Olympics, an opportunity for them to promote their ideas of racial supremacy to the rest of the world. And how did they do that? By comparing German athletes to Greek marbles. One in particular, Hitler was so fond of that he purchased a replica of for himself, turning a Greek icon into a Nazi German symbol of hate. See, the Germans not only believed in their racial and civilizational superiority, but they also believed that what it came from was their direct descent from the Aryan culture of classical antiquity. Problem was, The assumption that they were the rightful heirs to ancient Greek culture was as fragile as the paints that once coated the famous Greek statues whose pristine whiteness made Germans, and yes, other Western civilizations, assume that ancient Greece was visibly white. You can imagine then their confusion in looking to modern Greece and seeing a lot of people who were far less Aryan than them. To justify how they, Germans, were more rightful heirs to the whiteness they associated with ancient Greekness than actual modern Greeks themselves, again stemmed from a misconception about paint that had faded from statues. They referred to the, now long disproved, discontinuity theory of racial origin of the Greeks. The race of the Hellenes has been wiped out in Europe. Physical beauty, intellectual brilliance, innate harmony and simplicity, art, competition, city, village, the splendor of column and temple. Indeed, even the name has disappeared from the surface of the Greek continent. Not the slightest drop of undiluted Hellenic blood flows in the veins of the Christian population of present-day Greece.
In other words, they thought that people like me, or better yet, like my grandparents on their own, were poorer quality than we used to be for having been mixed up with others. As a result of this imperfection, we were not capable of being beautiful, intelligent, harmonious, or artistic. We'd spent too much time being conquered and letting our genes be diluted to really be worth anything anymore, according to their ideals of racial superiority.
The often classically trained German officers used this wrong idea that modern Greeks were an entirely new race and did not represent a continuation of the same Greek ethnicity that existed during antiquity to excuse the atrocities they committed. How can you occupy a place you're such a big fan of and rid it of its civilians by slaughter, unless you can explain to yourself why these Greeks aren't the same as the ancient ones you've got such a collective hard-on for? We apparently don't even have one drop left of whatever the good stuff is, and in fact they, supposedly descendants of Aryan Greeks who'd left Greece before all this dilution occurred, they were the last ones with that pure strain, that pure milky white skin, that blonde hair, those blue eyes, those features that everyone in Europe ought to have. What they were worried was going to happen in Germany and the rest of Europe if ethnic diversity were left unchecked, well, apparently it had already happened to Greece. For simply being what we were a lost cause. Which is why, since old Nazi stuff like this is required reading for modern white supremacists, you'll see people out there in American rallies bending over backwards to make themselves look like the false white Greek ideal originally conceived and promoted by German fascists. The truth is, Greece has always been a place of mixed ethnicities. It was a hub for trade of both goods like olive oil and genetic traits like olive skin. That's what made it such a special place. They understood that there were different kinds of people and, funnily enough, came closest to the right answer, aka natural selection, in believing that climate was what controlled people's appearances, but they didn't judge or grade people just for looking differently. If you're waiting for me to talk about all the cool stuff the Greek authors wrote about Ethiopians, don't worry, that's coming up.
But as far as how that affects me, to be told by freaky xenophobes that I'm too mixed up to be really purely Greek, I mean, fuck you, I guess. Problem is, that position comes from a complete misunderstanding of what Greekness is. As far as I'm concerned, look, my grandfather came from a small fishing village, his father had a business selling olive oil and sea salt, I'm here 3 generations from Zakynthos, Milao liga Ellenika, ala magirevo pola Ellenika. Yeah, my blood is mixed with Turks and Arabs and other Middle Easterners, but I can make Lucanico from scratch. Can you? I don't think so. I don't accept silly challenges of my Greekness from easily sunburnt asshats who don't even know how to pronounce gyro or tzatziki. I'm Greek, I'm comfortable with my Greekness, I am the Greekest Greekster I know. Am I proud of my heritage? Absolutely, but to the point of supremacy? No, because I understand that the fundamental values of any Greek person should be hospitality. And I know not everybody feels this way, clearly, but to me, racism, that's sort of the opposite of philoxenia, no? That's sort of the antithesis to Greek virtues. And I'm not saying that you need to be Greek to have the right values to not be racist. No. But what I am saying is that trying to justify your discrimination with a false Greek superiority, a culture that is actually affixed to hospitality both in virtue and etymology, that makes you an idiot. So if you're racist and you want to dance around pretending to be Greek, please do me a favor and just close your fucking face.
Greek identity does not belong to white people because, as the Germans put it so well, Greeks aren't pure white people. I've read stories about people who'd consider themselves brown until going to Greece and having identity crises as they find themselves surrounded by white Europeans with darker skin than them. In my life, I've heard Greeks described as either white passing or brown passing, depending on the context of the part of the world and who it is who's judging them. In the same way that, where I live at least, I've heard, and would personally agree, that Lebanese and Syrian people are Greek passing.
Again, this might just be a matter of my view being different because of the type of multiculturalism that exists where I live. But for example, here in the greater Montreal area, one of our biggest grocery store chains is called Adonis. It's of course named after the mortal lover of the Greek goddess Aphrodite, also the name of a bakery here. Check it out. And their logo is even the fucking Olympic brazier. But is it a Greek grocery store? No, absolutely not. It's Middle Eastern. It's owned by Lebanese people. When you walk in, you hear Arabic music playing. But are these guys Greek passing? Yes, because they come from the same general area, they have similar histories, and they eat similar good food. This is where I got my meat and intestines for some traditional lucanico I made a while back. Were they any less Greek because I shopped at a Lebanese grocery store? No, of course not. The meat was great. This whole place is great. It's not exactly Greek, but it's more Greek passing than a manja cake grocery store. And the reason they mask their true nature under this layer of Greekness is because, if I had to guess, the average city dweller who might find it challenging to enter an openly Middle Eastern Mediterranean grocery store knows what a Greek one is and might be more comfortable with that. I've no joke met people who can't tell the difference between Greek and Arabic text, so I don't think it's a stretch to assume that the typical uncultured millennial dude on his way to pick up a block of feta to recreate a TikTok recipe would hear Arabic music and think it's Greek. The unfortunate consequence, however, is that of course attribution doesn't get assigned accurately. Greeks make baklava, sure, but we didn't invent it. It's an Arab thing we learned through association. But because they sell it at Adonis, white people think it's Greek.
And yes, to hold myself accountable, it's hard to talk about this kind of thing without unintentionally diminishing other people's racial experiences. That's certainly not my intent. I wouldn't come up here and call myself like a person of color or anything, though there are certain people of my same heritage who I think could call themselves that depending on their background. Besides, where I live, the majority's already drawn a line and coined the term for people like me.
Ethnic.
But I think some people would find it interesting to know that despite how most would classify me, I've personally lived certain notoriously brown experiences.
I mean, you know, beyond just the guy from Al Taib speaking to me in Arabic across the counter on my falafel run. I appreciate it, man, I really do, but you got me pinged wrong.
But for example, I currently hold a 100% selection rate for random searches at the Trudeau International Airport. Would I prefer to not? Yes. But I don't really have a choice in the matter, because when I travel in the summertime, when Greeksters like myself are very in season, I guess to the security guards the first thing that crosses their mind isn't, oh hey, look, there goes a ripened Greek guy. Instead, they see me as a different kind of stereotype, which brings us full circle, because you almost never see Greeks who look this dark in Western media. I could sit here all day picking at poor casting choices for Greek characters in films.
97 keys no mavro.
Or I could just talk about Liam Neeson.
Release the crime!
Liam Neeson, the actor notorious for being so attached to his natural Irish accent, he'd sooner ask to have a concession for it written into the script than tone it down on the big screen.
I moved here from Ireland with nothing.
Yeah, so it seems like the perfect guy to cast as Zeus, literally Greek god himself. As a Greek person, I really wish I could help you pick up on the same dissonance as I do listening to an Irish Zeus and an Australian Perseus talk about whatever the fuck they have to say to each other scene after scene.
I got everything I need right here.
You're the son of Zeus, after all.
Clearly no one cared, not even enough to do a silly Souvlaki voice. Come on. I mean, yeah, that'd be offensive, but at least it'd be something. At least it'd make me feel something, man. It's not just that the voices are wrong or that the ethnicities are wrong, it's that these guys could not care less. You really don't have to dig too far to see just how little this dude understands about the cultural significance of the role he's playing. In an interview I found 30 seconds before saying,
I've always had an interest in Greek mythology.
He goes on this rant about what it means to him to play Zeus.
I'm Zeus, the king of the gods, and he formed, fashioned, created human beings for his pleasure. By creating human beings, his rationale was, these are my little playthings.
What the fuck are you talking about, Liam? Zeus didn't create human beings, that was Prometheus. That's chapter 1, that's Greek Genesis. Zeus, he wasn't happy about that, right? He was pissed, man, he was pissed. He thought human beings were fucking stupid. He thought they weren't worth shit, like Timatzo Malagas. That's why he fucking chained Prometheus to the top of a fucking mountain to be tortured by an eagle for all of eternity. Liam, what the fuck are you talking about? What kind of nargiles are you smoking there?
Just the total lack of attention to detail. More than that, lack of rationale is, sort of culturally insensitive. Take a story from any culture other than Gaelic, cast Liam Neeson as the most important figure in it rather than an actor of that heritage, and then let him speak in his natural voice, let him mispronounce everyone's names, and make sure, above all else, that he literally doesn't know the first thing about his character. It's a recipe for disaster. It's inaccurate. It's dismissive of people who, I think, deserve better representation in media. It is the bare fucking minimum. And while I don't know if I'd call it offensive, it's definitely annoying. But most audiences don't care. Greek myth and Greek history movies aren't made for modern Greek people. They're made for the masses, Western audiences who've got ancient Greek fetishes. That's why very few studios even care enough to go as far as darkening Gerard Butler's skin in post.
If this was someone of another culture, it might be appropriate to call it a caricature, or even offensive. Could they have just hired any random Greek actor off the street and gotten the same look? Yes, but I'll allow it, because that's how slim my pickings are. I have to be okay with Greek representation being a Scottish man with computer-simulated tan, because at least it shows more care than plopping in an Irish man without one.
These movies aren't made for people like me, people who'd care to be represented. That's why nobody but me hears anything wrong when Greek characters in these dumb movies open their mouths and speak Outback Greek, Lucky Charms Greek, or the fucking Queen's Greek. And it's also why no one but me cares when the actors behind these characters open their dumb mouths and reveal that they don't know the difference between Aristotle and Abraham's gods. Then there's the quick gag Greeks. The Greek who shows up for like 2 seconds, expresses a stereotype, makes a mockery of themselves for a fast laugh, and then leaves. It's the Greek who sticks his head in frame, shouts "Opa," smashes a plate, and fucks right off. The Greek who's only there because they need a funny or loud or fat or hairy or oily or all of the above ethnic character to come in and do something over the top, and it'd be offensive if they picked anyone else. Except maybe an Italian. In the best case, these kinds of characters reinforce negative stereotypes. In the worst, well, you know how it goes. Either way, they're enough to normally turn me off of a piece of media almost immediately. Look, maybe you can appreciate the goofy, low-tier, I cooked the spicy meatball, or I eat the pita bread with tzatziki jokes, but I can't. My grandparents' inability to speak either English or French very well is exactly why they were exploited. Socially, in the workforce, in politics, everywhere. This might just be another case of my sensitivities being different because I've grown up as an ethnic kid in Quebec, but I just can't get into this. Haha, this guy can't speak very well? That's not a joke, that's... where I live at least, that's discrimination. In the same way that, like, when Canadians outside of the province make fun of Québécois by putting on goofy accents, I don't think that's a good enough bit on its own.
Ah ouais? Did you say drunk today?
I'm sorry, I don't speak whatever French this is.
And, like, not that I've never liked this, but come on, Djibouti Dubs hasn't been funny since high school. Unless there's a greater meaning behind it, you know, an actual punchline, it's not a funny enough joke to just point at someone who came off a boat and say, ha, that guy can't speak English and doesn't have the same privilege as us. Or, ha, that guy's hairy and loud guys are dumb and gross.
Yeah, the hairy shoulders, that's true. I've got that one too. It's actually funny, in COVID times it makes it really hard for the doctor to put a band-aid over you after they inject you, so once the hair kind of poofs back out, the band-aid's sitting like a couple of inches off the skin and it's serving absolutely no purpose. And yeah, some of us have greasy hair and these fat crooked noses, but what's the joke? To depict people admittedly realistically and just call that comedy? There's no punchline.
There is but one single exception I've ever discovered to this rule, and it has nothing to do with the rest of this video, but Jesus Christ, I want an excuse to talk about it, because it goes so far into trying to show how crazy this one Greek guy is that they end up reversing it on themselves and showing just how weird and socially inept they are as American characters and filmmakers for thinking this guy is weird. But I think it's something a viewer wouldn't pick up on unless they themselves are Greek and understand the magnitude of what this character ends up doing. It's from the show, and honestly I don't even know how I stumbled upon this, but it's from this 60s World War II drama series called Combat. In one episode, they team up with a Greek colonel and his group to take on some Germans, but after the Greek guy gives some impulsive orders, which gets a couple of troops injured, the Americans are pissed. They think he's a crackhead. So they settle down in a bunker at one point to rest up, and the Greeks try to offer some of their sausage and cognac. The Americans want to accept because their food is shit, but out of pride, they refuse. The then enraged, crazy, practically barbaric, strange ethnic colonel throws down his knife and starts maybe one of the most unintentionally beautiful expressions of sorrow and grief I've ever seen. He starts doing a zibekiko, the only one I've ever seen in any non-Greek media. How the fuck do I explain this? A zibekiko is a solo folk dance invented by displaced Greek soldiers in the Aegean during the Ottoman rule. Traditionally, it's only done by men, although that started to change in modern Greece. As far as steps go, there are none to a zibekiko, only a rhythm and a set of common gestures. Arms spread out, head tilted down, spins, foot taps, crouches, kicks, stomps, slams, etc. It's also a dance that's normally done while incredibly intoxicated, but even if not, is always entirely improvised. It's a raw expression of the dancer's feelings and inner intensity of sadness and fear. Often they'll do it with their eyes closed, searching only within themselves for the steps, not being egged on by the crowd outside. It's an incredibly personal, improvisational dance. Everyone's will be different, as unique as their fingerprint. It's kind of a sacred thing, not to be taken lightly. It's supposed to be the ultimate expression of masculinity, or, in modern Greek communities, non-gendered bravado, dignity, and humility. According to the standards of the society that originally made this dance, a true man shouldn't be afraid to let his pain manifest in art, and anyone prepared to undertake this performance should be granted an audience's attention. The unwritten rule among Greeks is that any event can only be host to one zibekiko. If it happens, but it's not something you repeat twice in one night out of respect for whoever was brave enough to open themselves up like that. As a Greek, when you witness someone starting to do a zibekiko, your job is support. You clear the space around them and then do not interrupt. Depending on the conditions of the dance and the dancer, if you're close enough to them, let's say, you then may need to take a knee on the sidelines and clap to the rhythm for them. Sometimes, and if the venue allows it, you might also be tasked with rushing into the circle to drop off shots for the dancer. In very, very rare instances, a second dancer can join in, but their bond has to be extremely strong and it has to be appropriate for the event, like that of a father at his son's wedding, or of two brothers at a funeral, or of two soldiers after a battle, as it was originally intended. It's a daunting, scary, but humbling dance to perform and witness. It's one I'm really worried about doing myself someday, as it's customary to do at your own wedding as a way to acknowledge all the worry and fear and uncertainty that comes with starting a new chapter of your life. Some people call it the seasoned man's dance, and I don't know if I'll consider myself a seasoned man by the time I'm ready to get married. I'm a wimp. I work on a keyboard and complain about the video games as a hobby. I don't know if I've lived enough experiences to find in myself the steps to my zibekiko. Other than making better barbecue than literally anyone I know, there's nothing traditionally manly about me. Or maybe I've assimilated too far. Maybe I'm making the mistake of applying Western masculinity norms to myself. This is a Greek dance after all, and Greek men aren't supposed to be stone cold. They're supposed to feel and emote and dance and wear skirts and do butt stuff. I don't know, maybe I'm fine after all. But the point, for as meritable and brave of a dance as it is, to outsiders the zibekiko looks silly and especially unmanly. Back to this fucking stupid-ass TV show. Clearly the intent of having the Colonel break out into dance to cover his backstory rather than just sit down and expose it verbally was to, again, show just how irrational the Greek man is. Just how unfit to lead he is. He's overly emotional, he strategizes with his heart rather than his brain, and by the end of the episode, the writers commit to this bit because this way of dealing with things is what finally gets him killed. But to me, a participant in this culture and someone who knows the significance of this dance, the juxtaposition of him against the American GIs who've so far stubbornly refused the hospitality, declined the food, and ridiculed him for daring to dance without women present, to me, it makes them seem like the arrogant, condescending assholes. In this instance of the quick gag Greek trope, depicting the wild, loud Greek man next to the quiet, reserved, supposedly civilized American man, for once, with the cultural baggage I have, goes so far that it tips the scale into positive representation. And I fucking love it. Also helps that the actors themselves are Greek, obviously, but fucking hell did they accomplish the opposite of what they wanted. Again though, it doesn't really matter, because most audience members aren't like me and won't read it the same way as me because they don't have the same context as I do. One point of clarification on the whole quick gag thing. I know one of the things I'm focusing on a lot is their appearance and their behavioral stereotypes that are picked on. I should say our behavioral and appearance-wise stereotypes. There is also this element of it which is you've probably noticed the whole Greeks owning a restaurant stereotype. You go to a restaurant and you order something and the Greek can't figure out what the hell you're trying to order. And one of the things I didn't mention this in the script, and maybe it was a mistake, but that whole SNL skit with Bill Murray where he's a Greek guy and the guy's trying to describe exactly how he wants his eggs and his sausages and his hamburger and all this shit, and Bill Murray can't understand.
straight up, like, literally happened exactly to my yaya, and she got fired for it, and it was like a horrible thing. You know, haha, funny SNL. And I just want to address one thing, because like the thing about that stereotype is that there is like truth to it, you know, but the way I've experienced this as someone on the other side of this, you know, the fact that like Greeks tend to be involved in the restaurant industry, is it's not like there's a truth behind it that isn't really funny, and so to treat that just as like a punchline if you're not Greek is maybe like not the most appropriate thing to do. Now I can't comment on why it is the way it is everywhere, but I can comment on why it is the way it is where I live, and I have this really interesting book my girlfriend got recently, which is about quiche restaurants in Quebec, and there's a whole section on Greek restaurants and how many of them look really cringe, and one of the passages was really interesting to me, and it backed up a lot of the stuff that I heard throughout my own life. I'll just read this out to you. This might be inserted because I'm probably going to screw this up. En 1921, on dénombre à peine 2000 Grecs dans cette ville. Talking about Montreal. Mais ceux-ci possèdent 150 restaurants, 150 restaurants. Now, the Greek community in Montreal tends to often be compared to the Italian community. They went through a lot of similar struggles, though in different ways. So they compare. En comparaison avec les 15 000 Italiens qui en détiennent 14. So to recap, 15,000 Italians in 1921 lived in Quebec, and out of them, they owned 14 restaurants. Greeks, on the other hand, only numbered about 2,000 in all of Montreal, and they owned 150 restaurants. Now, the reason I always heard this growing up was because one of the exceptionally difficult things for Greeks as far as it came to assimilating into North American and especially Quebec culture was the language barrier. Italians had a leg up in the sense that Italian was very similar to French, whereas Greeks not only had to learn English and French, they had to learn a whole new alphabet, and they had to learn 2 new gender systems. In Greek, there are 3 genders. There's feminine, masculine, and neutral. In French, you have 2 genders. Everything is masculin or féminin. And in English, everything's neutral. So on all fronts, they had a really difficult time learning the languages. And so because of that, they had difficulty getting jobs in normal places. And they had difficulty, yes, taking people's orders at restaurants, trying to figure out what the fuck the difference between Sunnyside and Easy Over is. My grandmother could have certainly attested to that. And so as a result of that, for whatever reason, probably the theory is just like some guy from like a previous wave of immigrants who was Greek just happened to own a restaurant. It became easier for Greeks to, rather than assimilate into normal society and learn the languages, to just go the easy route and work at some guy's restaurant and then eventually own their own restaurant or start their own business or whatever the fuck. And so it got to a point where, yes, Greeks owned a lot of restaurants, not because haha funny joke, but because they were having difficulties assimilating into society, and in Quebec especially, a society that did not really see them as true Quebecers, even if they spoke French, did not see them as real members of the society worthy of any respect. And so what that led to was this development of not just, you know, Greeks kind of dominating the restaurant industry, but all of the satellite industries surrounding restaurants. If you walked into a restaurant, odds are it was owned by a Greek guy, but if you walked into a restaurant supply chain, if you walked into, you know, the guy who's giving you forks for the restaurants, the guy who's giving you the little ketchup packets, the guy who's like selling you the ingredients, like the middleman between the farm and the restaurant, every satellite industry related to restaurants and cooking and kitchen equipment and all these things started to be owned by Greeks, because they started to realize that all these Greeks, you know, the Greeks were cooks, the Greeks were waiters, the Greeks were restaurant owners, but to deal with them, you had to speak their language because they were having difficulty learning other languages. And so of all the Greeks who went the easy route, all the other Greeks who decided, actually, we're going to go our own way, they had a much easier way attaching themselves somehow tangentially to the restaurant industry. And so this whole thing of like, haha, funny, you walk into a restaurant and it's a bunch of guys making fucking tzatziki in the back and they're giving you the sauce and they're smoking the cigarettes and whatever the fuck, like, like, I get it, like, haha. But there's like a really sad truth behind it that, you know, they had to find unconventional ways to achieve success. And like, you know, 3rd generation, I speak English, I speak French, I don't speak Greek. And that's a little bit sad. And I, you know, I am the 1st generation to like have really sort of almost assimilated into this culture, maybe. But I have enough experience, you know, seeing what my parents went through and seeing what my grandparents went through to know that like it's not. it's not just a funny joke. It's not a punchline that comes out of nowhere. It's a punchline that comes from social pressures to assimilate and being unable to, and, you know, coming from a country that was having a famine and knowing that, like, you have to leave because there's a lot of reasons that people leave a country, and, you know, the Greek immigrants had a really tough time and they always had this dream that they would come back, and they never got to, and it's, you know, it was a really tough situation for a lot of people. And I think it's a lot more than Bill Murray with slicked back greasy hair and a mustache getting someone's order wrong. Like, I get that it's, like, to most people it's like lighthearted comedy, and yes, in the United States Greek people assimilated a lot easier, so did Italians. In Canada that wasn't the case, and especially in Quebec that wasn't the case, and I don't know if I'm speaking about things in a way that's just, like, not relatable, but, like, to me it's just like it's so not fucking cool, you know? Anyways, I hope I expressed myself properly, and I didn't even drink. I don't know at what point I'm inserting this in the video, so this might be foreshadowing for later, the part where I become an alcoholic later on, probably like 20 minutes from now.
And finally, the third kind of Greek to expect in media, the self-hating Greek. You'll find these in pieces of art created by Greeks themselves that focus on their own culture's exaggerated quirkiness. This is Nia Vardalos in every single film she's directed and every single role she's cast herself in, basically. Often, the self-hating Greek's goal, which I can appreciate, is to explore this identity and the struggles that come with it, self-criticizing in a way that's very interesting to me. Do Greeks have an issue with egotistic pride? Yeah, let's talk about that. Do Greek parents have trouble regarding their children as real people? Okay, we're going somewhere. Are Greeks addicted to Windex? Nah, okay, Nia, you lost me.
The problem with these kinds of cynical Greek self-caricatures is that to the manja geeks in the audience, they don't know the difference between legit commentaries on our own social norms and stupid, poorly written gags. That's the reason 20 years after Nia Vardalos shit the bed, I'm still being told Windex jokes. At the core of it, there's a good joke there. It's even a silly language one. The bit is that it's not uncommon for people who don't speak English well to misunderstand advertising and think something has more uses than it does. In my family, one example was Vaseline, which, to be fair, does legitimately have like 1,000,001 uses. It's just that my grandparents found 1,000,001 more. But Windex specifically, Nia accidentally committed so hard to this joke that she convinced legions of people that it was true, to the point that I'll be having a conversation with someone today and they'll ask me about fucking Windex. The self-hating Greek, despite being an exercise in self-determination, is a trope that creates false stereotypes. I have a lot more to say about my big fat Greek wedding, so if you're interested, I have a Patreon goal set up for that.
Look, Greeks are a clumsy, conceited, yet self-critical people, and we can't always be trusted to represent ourselves fairly, even in media we produce ourselves, without stumbling into self-loathing. We fall into our own traps, and I mean, fuck, I probably already regret multiple dozens of things I've said about myself in this video so far. All that to say, in light of how others tend to represent us or use representations of us, we have nobody to blame but ourselves, honestly. I don't think a Greek writer can write a passively Greek character. It's impossible. It's like asking a kid not to eat all the marshmallows. So, with all that out of the way, let's finally talk about Hades. Our main questions: what kind of Greeks are in this game? Did Supergiant pull from the list of known common Greek character tropes, or did they do something different? Well, to summarize, they basically plugged themselves right into the mold of the historical Greeks, or the Queen's Greeks trope, but with one tiny little twist that for some reason has been granting them a ton of praise, in excess, I think, of what they deserve for practically doing nothing different than the normal, tacky Hollywood bullshit. As is the norm, the Greek gods are not represented as Greek, an ethnicity which, within it, already contains a spectrum of diversity and should be what's defaulted to, in my opinion, when it comes to imagining characters from this pantheon. But instead of them simply replacing Greeks with the usual casting for Western-centric media, where Greek gods and Greek people are anachronistically depicted as Anglo-Saxon-type white people, Brits, Australians, and Irish dudes, Supergiant did something really cool and dared instead to make use of this opportunity to go for inclusion and diversity. Though not in all cases explicitly stated by the developers, the general community consensus is that people of African, East Asian, South Asian, and more heritage can find themselves in at least one of the characters here. And that is fantastic. I hate that I have to repeat myself, but I do because I'm worried people may have forgotten by this point, but yes, again, diversity is good. Having minority groups depicted in popular media has immeasurable positive impacts on people in those groups, and so creators of such work, like Supergiant Games, should consider that when creating and should receive credit for it when following through. Yet, worth noting, the diversity in Hades is purely visual. It only goes as far as what you see, it doesn't also encompass what you hear. As in, all characters either speak the Queen's or the colony's English depending on if they're Olympian royalty or not.
You've got quite the
fighting spirit in you there, I have to say.
Nobody has anything close to a non-native English-speaking accent, which I think is a pretty big missed opportunity, maybe even bordering on a mistake, for a couple of reasons. It's a bummer nobody sounds like they come from anywhere other than Britain or America.
But it's also important to remember that what's considered a minority changes from place to place. And when you're trying to inject good, progressive, diverse representation into a set of icons that belong to a different culture, are you not smudging your own values? Is it not a little sketch to only apply your nationalist definitions of what is a minority, and also, as we'll see in a moment, what is the majority, when deciding to design a diverse cast to fit into another culture's pantheon?
Basically, in a moment I'm going to drop my smoking gun, which is the reason given by Hades' creative director themselves as to why they went about things this way. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to show that it's an incredibly poorly researched take. And yeah, we're going to go into some history to explain why. Yet, it's important to remember, someone who's wrong about something, someone who isn't fully informed on a topic and makes creative decisions from a poor foundation can still do good as a result. The creative director of Hades, judging from their own words, isn't much more advanced in mythology than Mr. Neeson. They both have some pretty fundamental misunderstandings about the ancient and modern Greek society that, even though it's not my job to educate people on, I'd love to. And yes, the game may only exhibit Western-centric diversity, but that doesn't mean that showing a commitment to Western-centric diversity isn't good. Of course it's good.
What I'm saying, though, is that as far as Greek representation goes, which is what I personally am yearning for any of in Greek mythology games, although this is great and progressive in other senses, this isn't different than the treatment I'm used to seeing my ethnocultural group receive. Look, whether it's a Northern Irish guy or an East Asian guy in a toga, it doesn't really make a difference to me. Catalavenis?
And again, this isn't Supergiant's fault necessarily. This is my fault for expecting this of them. Whereas in Canada, and especially in Quebec, a Greek Anglophone like myself is considered a minority, and maybe later we'll see some examples of how Montreal game studios handle Greek cultural icons differently as a result of that, I wouldn't be in the United States. In fact, most people in the US are not like me. They don't seek Greek representation in media. Hades doesn't cater to me, it caters to a general American audience, and a general American audience these days would much prefer to see their country's view of diversity depicted in a game over the lame trend they're used to, what there's an overabundance of Greek mythology media that already does have a fully white cast of Liam Neeson-esque dudes running around in sandals and togas. Though, again, just visually.
Hanging out with Aries, all you say.
Supergiant didn't go as far as let this commitment to diversity interfere with the usual cringy British accent where it doesn't belong shit.
And I will say this just to grease the wheels for later, but there is a seemingly forgotten impact-wise difference between diversity in media where actors have to show their faces on screen and media where they don't. Keep this in mind, but what matters more? That a set of illustrated characters are diverse looking, or that the real human people paid to perform them are actually diverse?
Okay, not in the script, but I thought a little insert here would be worthy, but related to this topic. I'm going to save it for later, but you can kind of get a sense of where I'm going with this. But it's a lot like how, and I never played this myself, I only found out about it in researching this, but in Infamous 3, they set the game in Washington, and then they were like, oh, it's a no-brainer, we should make the main character a person of indigenous descent. And they were like, oh yeah, sure. And then they cast fucking Troy Baker to play him anyways, so it's just Troy Baker, mocapping and like doing facial animation for a person of a race that he is not. And like, I don't know, but like, is that not like the fucking digital age equivalent to like blackface? He I don't know, I don't know if someone, I don't know what the argument against that is, because that is literally what it is. It is an actor giving a performance and then wearing the face of someone they're not, and then the studio being like, ha, look, diversity, we did good, everybody, and everybody going, yeah, wow, they did it. And dude, what the fuck, man? What the fuck? What kind of fucking hippy-dippy bullshit is that? It's not you don't just get the brownie points for doing the bare fucking minimum, man. You gotta put some fucking elbow grease in that shit. Why don't you fucking cast someone of that ethnicity to be like, look, we actually did good. We gave back to the community in terms of representation and in terms of casting. Unless... I really don't think, and unless you're like, this is where, this is literally an insert, but I'm like making a separate thesis in this video. I'm putting my foot down. Unless your commitment to diversity extends both to the visuals and the character design, but also the casting, then you're racist. Just guys, stop giving fucking brownie points to these jackasses, man. The thing is, though, my challenge to this whole way of thinking about diversity is that to make a non-white passing Greek pantheon, which was the goal of Hades' designers, there exist kinds of Greek people, both ancient and modern, that could have satisfied that same requirement. Put in some brown Greeks, some real non-Caucasian passing Middle Eastern type Greeks. Put in the kind of brown Greeks that convinced the Germans that they were Greeker than them. Put in some mixed Greeks like me who still get stopped at airport security. Put in some Ethiopian Greeks, some Indo-Greeks. There are multiple ways, I think, to make a truly Greek pantheon that isn't pale and monochromatic in what Hades was trying to avoid. Fuck, look, this is gonna sound crazy, but passing this off as like a big victory, like, oh my god, they dared put black characters into a Greek mythology game, like, big whoop, man. There were black people in ancient Greece. We know that for a fact. Greeks had a misguided concept of geography, so they thought they all came from a catch-all African land they called Ethiopia, but they knew about them, they traded with them, they visited them, they made art about them. Many ancient authors wrote about Ethiopians with great reverence, describing them as generous, handsome, just, and even blameless. They appeared as prominent figures in myths, and Ethiopia was even where Hellenist worshippers believed the gods went to feast and party when not in their normal abode in Greece. The problem with the diversity in Hades isn't exactly the ethnic or colored people in the game. Many of the rarer ethnicities, relative to typical whitewashed Greek myth media, aren't ones that don't belong in this setting. They actually do. Contrary to where you might have thought I'm going with this, while it's not a victory in terms of diversity, it's a victory as far as accuracy goes. Every distinctly ethnic character in Hades is a win against the dumb Hollywood trope of having a bunch of wasps play Greeks. But the problem is that, still, with all this diversity, none of Hades' characters are distinctly ethnically Greek. There it is, the classic video essay twist. The problem is that in implementing a sort of trendy, Western, progressive, brownie point-seeking kind of diversity, one where the majority is white and there are a few token people of color, they actually made ancient Greece less diverse than it would have been. To a degree, and this is fucking bananas, and I'm not suggesting that this was deliberate, and I know that this was not their intention, but to a degree, they unintentionally represented ancient Greece closer to how the Germans did in the 1940s, aka mostly full of Aryan, marble-colored people. And I don't think that when it came to thinking about how to apply diversity to this setting, that this should have been the first answer they'd have arrived at. They not only expelled Greeks from their own culture in this game, but by going for something a little more complicated than necessary, they slipped up in a couple of places. For example, despite their stated best efforts to do good and represent a diverse collection of non-exclusively Anglo-Saxon white people for once, the group they ended up affording the best representation to was, you guessed it, Anglo-Saxon white people. It's not that they plugged in unnecessary colored people into this game, it's that they plugged in so many Nordic-looking people that they veered off their original intent a little bit. Now, you'd be correct to assume that given it's a diverse game, there's still gotta be some white people, but hey, it's set in Greek myth, so presumably those white people would be representatives of Greek or otherwise Mediterranean types of whiteness. You know, Iranians and Syrians might be Middle Eastern, but in the US Census, they're white people. Then you take a deeper look and realize that the white people here are whiter than they should be if they're supposed to be the Mediterranean kinds. You know, Southern Europeans, Northern Africans, Middle Easterners. And then you realize, oh no, they fucked up. These aren't Adonis white people, these are Walmart Supercenter white people. Of all the characteristics Mediterraneans are known for, one we certainly aren't is blonde hair. I have not in my life met a single entirely Greek, Lebanese, Egyptian, Syrian, or otherwise olive-skinned person with naturally blonde hair. The few I know who do have it are of mixed ethnicity and normally stick out like sore thumbs at family things, like living symbols of our inevitable assimilation. Blondness is a trait that has tended to mostly be introduced to the Mediterranean regions throughout history from outside influences, and due to its recessive nature, when it does manifest itself, it tends to not last very long in our gene pools. I've read a couple of maybe outdated statistics, so take this salted, but something less than 5% should describe how common blonde hair is to Greek people. I can only assume it'd be even lower for other Mediterranean people further from Northern Europe. In Hades, there are a total of 6 characters with blonde or dirty blonde hair, and another 2 if you count yellowish green, which I do, because it's my video, fuck you. That's out of a total 20 characters who are human, have hair, and are not explicitly of some other race or ethnicity other than white. And that's even sort of unfair, because some of the older white people here have white hair, and I'm not counting them as blondes, because, it's not really clear what their hair color would have been before it turned white. So they kind of skew the stats a bit in the opposite direction of the point that I want to make. But I can still make it, and that's sad. Almost half of the non-explicitly non-white characters in this game are blonde-haired. Black Athena isn't a new concept, and it's not a problem here either. Anyone who wants to get up in arms about this is a fucking moron. The real problem here is Viking Achilles, in light of the absence of black-haired, tan-skinned Greek anyone.
Roll, Shaggy, do we do a better job to retain Western whiteness haters than we did at fixed diversity in this game?
Kazoing, Scoob, I think we did. Looks like we were maybe virtue signaling at the expense of the virtue we were signaling.
Shit typical. Next time we make such a big deal about how we're trying to be more inclusive to people of color. Let's make sure the majority of our characters are not white blondes.
Oh, shut the fuck up, Thelma. I'm American. I have blondie hair and blue lace. I'm white and I'm happy.
Yes, most Mediterranean and most Greek people are white, but generic white representation isn't Greek representation in the same way that it's not Lebanese representation or Turkish representation or Syrian representation or Iranian representation. Hades does a better job representing non-Greek and non-Mediterranean white people than it does Greeks or than it does any other ethnic group they decided to include. On top of it, the one god who it'd be excusable to give blonde hair to doesn't have it. Fantastic. Great job, everyone. Am I crazy or what? This is what I mean when I talk about them applying a nationalist view of what the majority is, which, yes, I know nationalism has a very different meaning these days, one typically not associated with diversity, but I'm running out of ways to say with regards to the narrow views held by most people in the country of America.
Basically, the majority, and the spectrum which describes it, that exists in the nation that created this mythos, and still to this day values and even, surprise, surprise, follows it to a certain extent, is different and arguably more diverse relative to American standards of diversity than the one depicted in the game.
Supergiant games, clearly inspired by Western-centric media that would have you believe that Brad Pitt with his flowing blonde hair is a convincing Greek, operate under the assumption that white people in Greece are the same as white people in North America, what, they see outside their window where their studio is based. And so when a character of their design is not explicitly not white, they pachinko themselves into American or Western whiteness characteristics instead of those of their region of origin. I don't know what to call this because I don't know if I'm comfortable calling this instance of one variety of white people being depicted as a different variety of white people whitewashing, but what is this?
Is this any better than white people in Charlottesville donning Greek symbols and icons that don't belong to them to demonstrate their misunderstanding of what they believe is their classical Aryan heritage? Actually, I'll answer that. Yes, it is better. I would never dare to equate these two. But as far as plugging mostly monochromatic Western white people into a setting that doesn't belong to them goes, both do this, and do it the same way, by dressing up non-Greek white people as Greeks. I understand and respect the game's attempt at giving diverse audience members a moment of recognition. I really do. But in this setting, with these kinds of cultural icons as the cast, the default white people should have not been the American or British or Germanic kinds. If they wanted to express diversity, they could have stuck to Mediterranean diversity, which would have, I think, been sufficient. That would have only called for equal to or less blonde white characters than black characters. And then nobody could possibly bring up the idea that, like other media producers, they whitewashed the people of Greek antiquity to suit their needs. Whether you're casting only white actors because you know that that's what the masses will watch, or because you need a majority white cast for the token ethnic characters to stand out, either way, there are no Greeks there, so you done fucked up. They missed out on the opportunity to just let these characters be Greek, a kind of people who are credited as the founders of Western civilization but themselves are excruciatingly un-Western. Yes, I'm talking about the same hairy-shouldered, crooked-nosed, greasy-haired, olive-skinned, post-pagan motherfuckers I was complaining about before, but truthfully, I call family. Greeks deserve to be included in pieces of media sourced from their culture, and not as the setup to a punchless joke, but as real kinds of people who existed and continue to exist and maybe could be normalized in their own stories. Pretty please? Instead of colonial type people who have an overabundance of media to see themselves in. I've been using Anglo-Saxon as a catch-all for a while, but yeah, instead of those guys, please, for once. Somehow, in committing to ethnic and racial diversity in a game with a Greek mythological setting, nobody saved a seat for Greeks themselves. And to me, that's... honestly, it hurts. We're chopped liver in reimaginings of our own stories. We can't be shown the way we actually look, we can't be heard the way we actually sound. What's the message that's supposed to send? We're ugly and we're stupid? Cool, thanks. And also with you. Got enough of that from the Germans, you know? As one Greek critic put it, we've been westernized, globalized, and commercialized out of our own cultural figures by people who can't even point to Greece on a map.
In the 80s, there are very few characters I can point to as representation of the kind of person I am and the kind of people I come from. And even of those left, most of them look more like winter me than summer me. Maybe there's Sisyphus. He's probably got the closest thing any of these poorly saturated, bluish-gray, imp-looking asshats have to olive skin, which, yeah, that tracks for how it feels to talk about the lack of Greek representation in Greek culture-related media. But otherwise, I don't know, maybe there's the bull guy? I'll be real, a little twirl he's got going on his hair, that's maybe one of the Greekest thing these designers afforded someone like me to notice. And besides, either of these guys speak, it's right back to square one. Come on, what's so scary about a Greek-English accent? At this point, there's more Nordic representation in the game than Mediterranean. Maybe next time they should just set their story in Thor's backyard if they want so many blondes. Anyways, thanks for leaving me so high and dry I have to look at the fucking animal character to find traces of myself. I hope it was all worth it just to have some shallow, barely developed diversity thrown in for brownie points. You know, a toga-wearing South Asian character voiced by a non-toga-wearing, non-South Asian actor putting on a British accent of all things. Nice, excellent work. I'm sure that's exactly what South Asian people would like more of in media, the knowledge that nobody of their heritage got paid to give a character who was colored to look like them a British voice. Grade A stuff. That's perfect diversity. I hate how this feels.
Let's talk about Hades' Dionysius for a sec, because he's a perfect example of how the designers tripped themselves up trying to handle too many conflicting social interests at once, and harmed their own cause.
I should probably reveal at this point, Dionysus' design is the main reason I've actively chosen to avoid playing Hades, because I don't want to support this kind of thing. He is maybe one of the most culturally and sensitively designed South Asian characters I've ever seen in a game, albeit probably unintentional. I doubt they knew what I know about the poetic baggage of this god, and yes, that wasn't a mistake. I am saying his faults are mostly not to do with his lack of Greekness, but instead how this character melds with South Asian culture. He fails on at least 3 levels, 2 general ones and 1 personal to me, so you don't have to care about that one, but I'll get into it because I think it's an interesting discussion.
First, well, it goes without saying, he's definitely not Greek. His appearance kind of extends beyond the spectrum olive skin tends to tan to the point that the general consensus among fans is that, like I said, he's South Asian. The thing about this is that if you've only read up to the second paragraph on this wine-loving, party-throwing god's Wikipedia page, this fits. Dionysius was known to ancient Greeks as a foreign god. Aside from his affection for the vine and other mind-altering substances, his sudden appearance and foreignness is what defined him to his cults. In his legends, it's told that he was sent away by Zeus and traveled through Asia Minor teaching people the art of winemaking, going so far southeast as India before returning, dramatically as the god of theater would, with an Indian panther-drawn chariot and a procession of other exotic pets. So again, if you're an outsider to this culture and to this character, and you've read only the first couple of lines in his wiki and you think you know everything, it makes sense. If there's any god to make South Asian, it'd be Dionysios, the guy who'd been there and came back and people thought he was foreign. But the problem with only getting that far down the page before designing an entire character based on his Indian foreignness is that you miss what exactly Dionysios did in India, according to these legends. Turns out he wasn't just traveling for leisure, he was killing a lot of people. The Dionysiaca is an ancient epic, admittedly written during the Roman Empire's rule over Greece, but early enough that the gods hadn't been renamed in Latin yet. In it, it's described that his expedition to the Eastern world was actually a conquest. Zeus sent him on an errand to go to India where people worshipped a sun god and forcibly convert them to Olympian worship instead. Stories are told of him single-handedly massacring entire Indian armies, drowning and poisoning people in rivers turned to wine, and founding Greek cities along the way in present-day Turkey, Afghanistan, and within the Ganges. Cities whose mythological origin stories clearly had some truth to them given they actually existed, surprising Alexander the Great when he stumbled into them during his own real worldwide conquests, sparing their destruction, seeing as their inhabitants claimed they were founded by Dionysius, some even sharing his name. Point is, no, none of this actually happened, and Dionysius, the god, wasn't a real guy, but In his stories, he was not very nice to ancient Indian people. Needless to say, those exotic panthers and elephants he brought back with him weren't gifts. So, the Hades character designer took a Greek god mostly known for drinking wine and his epic about conquering India, gave him the accent representative of a force that actually did colonize India and continue to hold it and commit atrocities against its people until recent history, and decided, hey, you know what people would love? If we made him look Indian. Straight up, there's a lot of things that bug me about the brownie point-seeking reaches for diversity in this game, and most I'd suggest people look past because their intentions weren't bad. But this one is such a fuck-up that I don't think anyone should excuse it. The least they could have done was ensure a South Asian actor got compensated to play this character, and they didn't even do that. There is nothing actually unquestionably good about this character's design. Like I said, I don't think this was done with intent. I believe 100% if they had known about the Dionysiaca, which, for Christ's sake, it's Dionysios' main epic, it's the least you should expect them to know, then given their values, they would have known that making a mythological, iconic conqueror of India South Asian could possibly be perceived as a little bit insensitive, and they wouldn't have done it. The fact that they did, all that tells us is something I already knew, but now I can prove. They didn't do their research. For a company trying really hard to please as many people as possible with their game, I'm convinced the only way they would have even considered making Dionysius look the way he does is because they didn't know about his history with India. I'm not South Asian, so I can't tell you whether or not this is actually offensive. And if you're South Asian, all I can do is share what information I have as someone who's in the know, and you can decide for yourself if the designer's kind of thoughtless mashup of our two heritages here was inappropriate or not. But judging from what I've read about lingering negative feelings towards Britain since India's independence, and given the sentiments I've heard expressed from people here who have a bad history with British colonization, I feel safe at least saying that, granted the option to design a character to look and sound like this, or do literally anything else would have maybe been a safer bet if they were trying to guard themselves from offending anyone. I feel mostly safe in assuming that this sort of representation does more harm than good for the same reason I don't consider classically trained fascist Germans in their Olympic propaganda to be good representation of Greeks, given first that they're not, and second that they then went and slaughtered entire villages of people I came from. Or, for the same reason I don't consider American white supremacists with Spartan helmets good Greek representation, given that they protest such things as mass migrations of refugees from Syria, who, ironically due to proximity and common Byzantine and Ottoman rule, have more in common culturally, linguistically, and genetically with Greeks than the average Confederate flag-wielding Yankee. I don't think this is supposed to be spun into a positive thing, like a reclaiming sort of situation, but I might be wrong about that. Please correct me if that's the case. I think it's just a really bad coincidence driven by good intentions, yet a failure to become substantially informed about the source material's baggage first. This character's design is maybe one of the poorest artistic choices I've seen in media in a long time. It's really unfortunate because South Asian people deserve more representation in American media, but dropping a line just for the sake of dropping a line can risk it landing in the wrong pond, and that can be harmful. And it's especially disappointing in light of the actual non-fictional history between Hellenic and South Asian cultures, and how they did actually meld and synchronize with each other following Alexander the Great's shenanigans. We can see that today through Greco-Buddhist art. Generations after actual Greek conquest that reached as far as India, the culture of descendants of leftover Greek mercenary settlements from Afghanistan to India would provide Eastern people with knowledge of a Hellenic style and vehicle of expression that allowed them to present themselves and their beliefs in a Western-compatible way. In fact, the first depictions of a human Buddha came from this era. Turns out South Asian people have been doing a pretty good job imagining themselves in Greek styles and settings for millennia longer than Supergiant has, and it's a shame they didn't consult any of that for inspiration. They could have made any character except the one who conquered India in his stories a little more brown and it would have been fine, I'm sure. Or they could have paid homage to Greco-Buddhist art and that would have been even cooler. But this was risky. Too risky for me to believe they knew about Dionysius' poem ahead of time. It's like when a car crashes into the one obstacle in an empty parking lot. All they needed to do was look ahead, but they didn't. Total disaster. But, as usual, most people don't know this much about mythology, so a mistake like this passes under the radar. Now though, however many of y'all have watched up to this point, you guys know. So, feel free to use this knowledge however you like.
Okay, this is the tough part. One of the things that bothers me personally about this use of one of my culture's icons by a game studio to gain praise for committing to ethnic diversity in such a poorly reviewed way that they actually created a character design inconsiderate of the ethnicity they were trying to represent is that my relationship to Dionysios is more than just that he's a figure from my heritage. I'm also his namesake. Yeah, so some of you might know me as Dennis, but that's actually just my nickname. Legally, my name is Dionysios, an alternative anglicized spelling of the name of the Greek god of wine. It's also, funnily enough, the first thing I learned on my first day of grade 1. My parents chose to name me this way, but then they also chose to only call me Dennis at home, and in fact, teach me to spell my name with one N, the French way, for assimilative reasons. So you can imagine my surprise in showing up to the first day of school, and, the teacher had set up this little activity where she made name tags for everybody and stuck them to a wall, and then we had to remove them and stick them to a desk, and that's how we selected our seats. For me, that was the moment that I discovered that my name was a lot longer than Dennis. And for the rest of my classmates, it was the moment that they discovered that I was probably the dumbest kid in class because I didn't even know my own fucking name. It's really sad. I still think of myself, all the other names gone, and then just one name tag left on the wall, and it just says Dionysius, and my teacher being like, well, that has to be your name, and me being like, I don't think so. It's like really sad, just me all alone staring at an empty bulletin board of name tags and one name tag left and being like, that can't there's no fucking way that shit is my name, dude. I was named after my grandfather, who was named after his, who was named after his, who was named after his, with this chain beginning at its ancient mythological source. It's led to some strange situations in my life. For example, showing up to doctor's appointments and them going, whoa, you're not a 70-year-old man. Montreal's a small city, so if me and my grandfather happen to go to the same clinic, odds are they're going to mix up our files. When my papu was sick and dying, I actually had to be admitted to the same hospital myself for a little procedure, and it was a serious concern that they might mix up our information, especially with regards to family calling in to get updates on him, and instead hearing from a nurse that I had been released or something. Until he passed, every time I called to make an appointment, I had to refer to myself as Dionysios the Young One. Thank God my cousin Dennis wasn't sick too, or I'd have run out of specifiers. But it's also just been a dumb and silly hindrance for other things. For example, I've been denied from cashing checks at the banks because writing them out to Dennis doesn't prove that they're actually for me. Funnily enough, I used to live in a place with a large Chinese population, and the clerks there understood it immediately, because it's the same idea as having a Chinese name and an English name. It's really when I'd go to a bank with a non-ethnic clerk where I'd get stopped for potential fraud. Anyways, fun stuff. Even in modern, mostly Orthodox Christian Greek culture, it's pretty common for people to be named after old Olympian pagan gods. Greeks are still really big fans of mythology and our connection to it. We're well known for not just naming our children, but also our dogs and the dishes at our restaurants after mythological figures. I've met both women and chihuahuas named Athena. My old Labrador Retriever was named Zeus, and Aphrodite is the best bakery in Park X. More on that one later.
The point is, this is my name. It's been my name my entire life, and I'm proud to have it. And his history with India aside, as much as I understand the importance of diversity, I can't help but explore this selfish feeling that I wish, for once, I got to see a depiction of this character my family was proud enough to name me and all of my ancestors after actually look like us. I know that it's maybe greedy to suggest that I think I, as a Greek person, would get more out of this character if he looked like me than someone of South Asian descent gets out of seeing him look like them, but I think as far as South Asian representation goes, this is really, really shallow. In fact, if you dig deeper into it like I did, you can uncover that it's actually afflictive, that if you know the full story, it might actually give someone from India, for instance, negative feelings about seeing this character look like them. Maybe what I'm trying to say is that doing a bad job giving people of a different ethnicity a kind of detrimental moment in the spotlight, I don't think justifies choosing to avoid giving someone of my heritage their first ever positive representation of their ethnicity in a game. South Asian people deserve representation, but they deserve it to be better and more thoroughly researched than this. They also deserve to be hired to play their own roles, just saying. And Greeks, a people often forgotten in conversations about diversity, deserve representation too. In fact, I'd go as far to say that, especially when our mythology is being used, we're practically owed it.
My name is Dionysios, and I'm here to say any big budget project that chooses to depict the god I am literally named after in a way that is either unfamiliar to me and or insensitive to another culture should be embarrassed. Whoosh, bang, zip.
I've never once seen a Dionysios in modern media that looks like me, arguably the most accurate depiction and embodiment of the fucking Greek god of wine and festivities I've ever known. I just like to have a good time, and I want people around me to feel good, man. Going for such a hollow representation of someone else's culture in place of my identity, the one that a Greek god should default to, sends me the same message that Hollywood's casting does, that I'm not good enough stock to be represented in my own culture. My people's place is in silly cartoons that make fun of our hairy shoulders. We're a punchline, not main character material. What, Dionysus is supposed to be fat and jolly, aka Mediterranean, aka me? No, he's supposed to be hot, chiseled, and sexy. No, it's okay, I get it. I can't be attractive. Why don't we just cut to the chase, make this fucking guy blonde dude like the Germans do, and call it a day, huh? I hate how this character, who, again, is so important to my culture that I am not even the first person in my family to be named after him, makes me feel about myself. And so to me, this is a design failure. Having removed every aspect of this character that I could responsibly or morally agree with, there was just one thing left for them to screw up, one final nail in the coffin that's led me to purchase a lot of alcohol recently, and not for the reason you think. I'm going to coin a very goofy term right now, and let's be clear, they're not the first artists to do this, and they won't be the last. They red-washed the last remaining part of Dionysios that could have and should have been Greek, his krasi, his wine. While it's likely that red wine grapes were the first to be harvested in ancient Greece, white wines were, and still are today, more popular there. If you know anything about the Mediterranean diet, it shouldn't be a surprise. Poultry, fish, and seafood go better with subtler dry white wines than red. If you were treating yourself to some lamb souvlakia though, then you might consider a red, except, red wine didn't exactly exist in ancient times like it does today. Instead, there were rich, dark, highly concentrated black wines that had to be diluted with water to make them drinkable. Only then, depending on how well mixed they were, would they appear red. Otherwise, what people mostly drank was white, a custom that's stayed the same through the eras. And of those whites, many are actually what are considered orange wines, created by the Greek tradition of leaving the crushed grapes to oxidize while still in contact with their skins, a major no-no in other cultures. It's only really in the last century that Greek winemakers stopped doing this and started pressing away the skins because they realized they could sell and export more if they made wine foreigners actually liked. To the point, most liquor stores where I'm from, if they have Greek imports, they only have white wines. And for as unpopular as Georgian and Greek orange wines are, I've had an easier time finding them than Greek reds. Until recently, I should say, with the ongoing supply chain crisis, it finally took that before I started to see a couple more reds than oranges on the shelves. Most Greek grapes, descendants of ancient varieties, are white, especially in the Peloponnese, where most Greek wine comes from. That's just how it is. So Greek wines typically are white. There are very few red varieties. The two you're probably most likely to find are this, I don't know what the hell it is, but this is Xinomavro. This is the one that fucking, what's his face in Percy Jackson couldn't pronounce.
Xinomavro.
Xinomavro. Come on, the fuck, man. Here's the thing. I know I'm being a little bit of a nitpicky asshole, but
would you like a taste?
The Greek god of wine should at least be knowledgeable about Greek wine, right? Xinomavro. Ksi, not kis. Ksi. It's the opposite. Also, while I'm pissing on Percy Jackson, can we just acknowledge the fact that they imply that, like, to be able to read Greek, you have to be dyslexic? Like, there's this whole part about how, like, Percy Jackson is dyslexic and he doesn't understand, but really it's just that he can read Greek, he can't read normal words. Like, when my grandfather came off a boat, he had to figure out English. It wasn't that difficult for him. It wasn't this whole, like, the implication is that Greek is so complex, which we're going to touch on this later. But the implication is that it is so complex that if your brain is hardwired to understand Greek, you can't understand anything else. So Greeks must just be complete fucking morons, right? Like, I don't know how the fuck my dad manages it. He can read in 3 fucking languages. I don't know what the fuck he's doing. He must have had a really, really tough time for him in school when he was seeing all the letters going, come on. And that's without even getting into Retsina, the nationally protected and most popular and ancient variety of preserved wine in Greece, but one so controversial that many Westerners from the Roman Empire to even modern times have been so utterly repulsed by it that they consider it a perversion and even an assault on the classic drink. Retsina is a resonated wine, as in it's infused with pine resin for flavoring. This gives it a sprucey aroma, or as critics would say, an acrid turpentine taste. Greeks originally started infusing their wines with resin not for enhancement, but rather by necessity.
clay pottery was permeable to air, so to prevent wines from spoiling in storage, they would mix in the resin, which, as it would come to rest, would coat the inside of the container and prevent oxidization. However, a side effect was that the flavor of the resin would be incorporated into the wine, impossible to remove. Basically, any wine that wasn't made for immediate consumption was stored with resin and, as a result, tasted of spruce and turned to retsina.
As vinification technology advanced, though, and the Romans figured out barrels, relieving winemakers of the need for funky storage tricks, the Greeks, who had become accustomed to the flavor of their stored resinated wines, continued including it as an enhancement.
Today, Greeks are still mixing strong-tasting pine resin into their wines, though not so much in the ones they export, mostly in the ones they make for themselves. If you go to a Greek restaurant and you ask for a glass, then unless you specify otherwise, they'll probably return you a cup of some kind of white retsina.
The particularities of wine in ancient Greece also influenced how they were consumed. Wine was typically not something you drank out of an individual glass or a cup, for example, like the one Dionysius is often depicted with. This concept came with the advent of lonely wine moms. Because it was so tricky to store, the moment a large amphora was opened, it needed to be drunk entirely. That's why drinking was often a group activity, such as at symposia. For white wines, large decorative conical cups called rita were used. For dark reds, since they needed to be diluted, they were almost only ever had at communal events and were either pre-mixed in large vases called kratires or drunk from large wide cups called kilikes, where the drinker could mix it themselves.
In ancient Greece, wine looked different, tasted different, and was drunk differently. Today's Western wine culture didn't exist in classical Greece and still doesn't exist in modern Greece. People drink room temperature whites that taste like pine resin straight out of whatever the hell glass you've got. Mine's from IKEA. Stenia. This is completely foreign to most people and very different from the kind of wine and wine culture Dionysus is depicted in Hades and in most other English media as being the god of.
I know it might sound silly, but wine is a pretty substantial part of classical and modern Greek culture. And unlike our food, which is not so secretly, strongly, and thankfully inspired by Middle Eastern traditions, wine is something that Greeks haven't changed much about the way they do since they started doing it. For example, almost all Greek winemaking grapes are indigenous to Greece, and they're really proud of that. There are tons of protected geographical indicated zones whose unique climates and soil conditions make Greek wines as unique as they are.
Basically, as a Greek person, what I'm saying is that it's automatic. You drop a plate, I say oppa. You ask me what the heck is Greek wine, I say it's white and it's retsina and you probably won't like it. Simple as that.
So then why the hell is Dionysios always depicted with red or practically purplish wines instead of the more popular white wines of his homeland? The ones that, he's the god of? Well, because in Italy, France, and America, when people think of wine, they think of red wine. I mean, it's the blood of Christ, right? Of course it's red. And so when an artist from a game studio in California is given a prompt as vague as the god of wine, their local biases come through and they don't even consider for a second that what wine is to them might not be the same as the wine that this god is the god of.
To most people, resonated wine is an alien and gross concept, but resonated wine is what wine was when Greek people decided they needed it to have a god. That's literally why his thrysos, his fucking staff, which I see did make it into the game, is topped with a pine cone. Not just for fun, but because in Greece, the flavor of wine was, and still is today, as influenced by pine as it is grapes. You were so fucking close to the answer, and then you just jumped right over it.
Like every other Western media studio responsible for a depiction of Dionysios has been guilty of doing before, they read God of Wine and said, "Ooh, I love wine," and designed him around their regional concept of what wine is, not that of the culture he came from.
Ah oui, Dionysios, le conquérant sud-asiatique de l'Asie du Sud et le dieu du Merlot et du Cabaret Sauvignon. Tabarnak que ça fait dur, man.
So the question I'm left asking is, why is this the way things went? What was the reason for organizing a trendy Western take on diversity into a setting where, number one, it doesn't belong, and number two, another kind of diversity, one easier to tap into despite no one having done it yet, exists? Why didn't they just let the Greek gods be Greek? Why couldn't they have just looked Greek? Why couldn't they have just sounded Greek? What's the deal? Luckily, we have an answer, straight from the creative director himself. See, he, presumably someone raised on a Western Hollywood version of mythology in ancient Greece, which isn't representative of the real thing, assumed that the gods had to be ethnically Greek, which he probably associated, like others throughout history, with prototypical whiteness. But then he had an epiphany. They're called the Greek gods because they were worshipped in ancient Greece, not because they themselves are ethnically Greek, aka the Greek gods are not Greek people. We knew going into Hades that we wanted this to be the story of a big dysfunctional family set in the underworld of Greek myth, told from the underworld's point of view. As we discussed and researched the Olympian from canon sources, something stood out that in retrospect was obvious. They're called the Greek gods because they were worshipped in ancient Greece, not because they themselves are ethnically Greek. Zeus rules all the heavens, not just the airspace over Greece. Poseidon rules all the seas and land. They sprang from the Titans who sprang from primordial chaos, the source of all creation. So it stands to reason that the gods represent all people of the world, at least indirectly.
Ooh, that's not true. The Greek gods are ethnically Greek. They kind of have to be for some of the myths and even some of the history to make any sense. It's also not really true that their domain is more than just the air, land, and sea around Greece. Again, not that that excludes certain places or diverse peoples from their coverage. Remember, Greece is closer to North Africa than it is to Central Europe. All in all, I think this is a really poorly informed revelation to state as the basis for your game's very Western-centric diversity. I don't know what canon sources they looked into, but I'm going to pull out some of my own in a minute to argue basically the exact opposite. And I think it's also a dangerous and harmful assumption to make about a culture that isn't yours, one that for a time was part of a major world religion and today still survives, albeit in different ways than most people, I think. No. This reasoning about the Greek gods is just very wrong on many different levels, and honestly, it bothers me a lot. Let me explain.
So, why is Hades' creative director's reasoning bullshit? Well, first of all, there's what I would call the moral issue of taking another's culture, which originally had very narrow set of applications, and thrusting your own values through it, especially when that value is ethnic diversity, except your version of it. Greek mythology was never meant to be applied to the American way of life or to satisfy modern social needs. Yes, the ancient people who came up with this creation story intended for it to explain the existence of the entire world, but what's missing is that at the time, most people didn't think there was much else to the world than these tiny scattered islands. If you were lucky, if you were the right kind of merchant, maybe you'd know of Arabia or Ethiopia, but even to the most well-informed Greeks, the world's eastern end was India. It was a small plane of existence, the world of the ancient Greeks, one that didn't account for the sort of view of our planet we have today. And so their religion reflected this. The Greek gods were often regional. They were invented by people native to a certain part of the world as needed to explain the natural order of things local to them, that they could observe. Many of the polytheistic myths, for example, only exist to give reason for specific natural or geographic phenomena local to them. Lika Dorian are a set of islands you can go visit today. They're a popular tourist destination due to all the beaches. Originally one single landmass, it was created by an earthquake in 426 BC when the land between them fell into the ocean. In mythology, these islands were formed when Heracles threw his herald Lichas, who these islands are named after, into the sea for trying to poison him. Apparently he was torn to shreds by the throw, and each of his body parts became each their own island. Another archipelago origin story, the Echinades Islands were supposedly created by the river god Acheloios when 5 nymphs forgot to honor him among their gods at a festival. For this, he washed them away and flooded their land, leaving the 5 islands to mark their place. Mount Lycaon in the southern end of mainland Greece, east of the capital, Athena, where my grandmother came from, and west of the island of Zakynthos, where my grandfather came from, is where, according to some stories, Zeus was born, before being taken into hiding in the island of Crete. The mountain probably has roots to much older traditions, as archaeological studies have found evidence of human activity as early as 5,000 years ago. It's possible that the original pre-Bronze Age Neolithic Proto-Greek tribes had been using this mountain to worship whatever deities or forces they cared about, predating the now well-known ancient Greek polytheism by at least a millennium. As the first stories of Zeus began to appear, the cults that existed nearby probably just pinned him to a mountain that already had spiritual significance to them. To some people, his association with the mountain even gave him a last name. Zeus isn't just Zeus, he's Zeus Lycaos, Wolf Zeus. Again, probably a remnant of some long-lost wolf-related icon that people went to worship there before they did any Olympians. Today you can go there to visit the ruins of the Sanctuary of Zeus, though I read that there's some superstition about letting pregnant people attend because no other child is allowed to be born on the same mountain as a god. Classic Greek shit, there seems to be some sort of curse involved. I'd stay away if you're expecting.
But that's the thing, not everyone agreed with the whole Wolf Zeus vibe. That was mostly a regional idea limited to the people of Arcadia, where Mount Lycaon is located. To others, Zeus was born in the same place he was raised, in a cave on Mount Ida in Crete. Simple as that. That's the thing about ancient mythology. It was a living, breathing thing as much as the people who told it were. And so, yes, just like any other matters of culture, it was very much the case that mythology was up for regional interpretation.
As Greek civilization advanced, becoming the set of fractious, in-conflict, disparate city-states that it was prior to the Persian invasion and subsequent war that elicited their alliance, different polis και χωριά, different cities and villages, each had their own version of mythology, or had cult presences that favored some gods over others. In other words, some of them had patron gods. The per-city polytheism and spirituality these people developed wasn't a set of global guiding rules like other world religions, as much as it was a reflection of themselves and their locality. Athena, the lead city, Athens, worshipped and was named after Athena, because that's where the central government was, that's where the goddess of wisdom and strategy would reside. It's hard to say how much the city was based on her versus how much she was based on the city. Either way, she was an Olympian embodiment of the values of that one city, and so as long as they lived and mattered, so did she. In Sparta, you would have found more shrines of Artemis, goddess of the hunt, and Heracles, because strength and self-sufficiency were some of their core values. In Zakynthos, where my grandfather is from, well known for hosting the Mediterranean's largest sea turtle nesting sites, your devotion would have likely been to Apollon, often pictured playing his turtle shell lyra to the natural beauty of the island. The fact that the ancient religion associated with the now famous polytheistic worship was as splintered as the Greek geography itself is exactly why it was relatively easy to convert its followers to Christianity. There was no single unifying vision behind what the Greek pagans believed. It changed from island to island, from beach to beach. Even after 1,000 years believing in Zeus and his posse, the faith was much less organized than the new one they were having imposed on them. Additionally, the regionality of it, which originally came from an attempt to describe the local, natural world around them, started to make less and less sense as the world map grew. With the scope of reality expanding, the idea that all of existence would be governed by small-time, granular, regionally bound gods was questioned. And so, with every city and village already interpreting myths differently or having sometimes conflicting beliefs and cult practices, the whole thing started to show its cracks. And although there are still followers of it, and although the orthodoxy it was mostly replaced by is rather pagan by Western Christian standards, the idea is that the absence of a large, modern, organized faith still devoted to the Olympians is a consequence of just how local they were to Greece. If the Greeks really believed, as the creative director of Hades thinks, that their gods covered more than just the airspace over Greece, then they wouldn't have felt as threatened and wouldn't have abandoned their beliefs just because the world grew. If this was true, then there would be a lot more people praying to Zeus in the 21st century than there actually are. Anyways, all this to say, other mistakes aside, I think it's pretty unsympathetic to use the limitations of a culture's knowledge at the time to excuse reinterpreting their local creation myth. I personally wouldn't use another culture's creation myth to depict the creation of anything other than them and their part of the world, especially when there's ethnic considerations or claim to that heritage, regardless of if that culture is dead or alive. And so for that reason, I wouldn't expect someone to show Poseidon ruling over the American Great Lakes, you know? Moralities aside, when deities are so closely tied to a certain region or a certain kind of people, it's kind of weird to take them out of it. It's even weirder to claim, especially as an incompletely informed outsider, that they don't belong to it.
We can tell that the people of ancient Greece kinda did believe that Zeus only ruled the airspace over Greece. The gods of Greek mythology were only meant to exist in Greece, only meant to describe Greek nature, and only meant to represent Greek people and the cultures they developed in Greek cities. The Greek gods, not being real things, were just reflections of their devotees, not all-powerful super-gods. If they were anything more, they wouldn't have died, much like the countless older lost belief systems that existed in the minds of proto-Greek human beings on these tiny little islands since the Paleolithic age, ones slowly but surely abandoned in favor of the next big idea, one that covered a bit more ground. From praying to a wolf spirit, ruler of literally just one mountain, to praying to Zeus, ruler of the entire sky, to finally praying to Jesus, the Alpha and Omega himself. Look, the ancient Greeks didn't really know anyone else or anywhere else existed, and the moment they found out, the moment the domain their gods owned, once the entirety of the world shrunk, they gave up and they picked Jesus.
So far I've explained how it is that Greek gods can't come from anywhere else and don't really belong anywhere else but Greece. The thing is, it goes deeper than that. See, the Greek gods don't just live in Greece, they're also ethnically Greek. Or maybe it would be better said that they are the source of the Greek human ethnicity. Either way, they have to be ethnically Greek for many of their stories to make any sense within certain historical contexts.
And this isn't really up for interpretation because such is the consequence of a pantheon that fucks a lot.
First of all, you might not know this, but the word Greek is kind of a bullshit exonym. For as much of an impact as the language has in etymology, the word Greek itself isn't Greek. It comes from a Latin word, Greci, used by Romans to describe Greek people and is the root of the names of Greeks in most Western European languages. Its structure is ironic and has led to some very uncomfortable situations for some people because there is no such thing as a hard G sound in Greek, which is why in English, Greek people have to refer to themselves as Greek. In the East, there's actually an entirely different root word for Greeks. In languages like Farsi, Arabic, Hebrew, and Turkish, the word for Greek people all have the core Yuna sound, sourced from the name of the ancient Greek tribe, the Iones. In English, the Ionians, who lived in the eastern islands of the Aegean Sea and on the western shore of today's Turkey. Greeks, though, don't call themselves either of these things. You may have heard before the terms Hellenism or of the Hellenes. These are words most people associate with ancient Greece due to what you might know are their mythological origins, but actually they're still in use today. In modern Greek, the language is called Ellinika, or Hellenese. The country is called Ellada, the Hellenic Republic, and the people are called Ellines, Hellenes. The ethnonym Hellene comes from myth, from the name of the mortal king of Phthia, Ellin, the patriarch and progenitor of all Ellines. To be a Greek, to be a Hellene, is to be a descendant of Helen, and Helen himself was, depending on who you asked, either the mortal son of the Titan Prometheus or of the king of the gods, Zeus. That's why the word Greek is bullshit. It removes the mythological source from the Hellenic ethnicity, something that can't really be decoupled from this identity. Was Helen a real person? Probably not. But does it matter? No, at least not more than whether Adam or Eve or Abraham or Jesus were. Ancient Greek ethnicity and ancient Hellenism were not separate things. Ancient Hellenism was an ethno-religious affair.
Hellenic ethnicity was pinned to a belief in a shared Olympian bloodline. The Hellenes were the children of Helen, and thus also the children of Zeus or Prometheus. And not like in the Christian way of, we're all God's children, like in the way that, well, when a mommy and her god really, really love each other, God takes his you want to get like you gotta get like good and make sure it's like and everything's like you want to try to get like at least like 3, maybe even like 5 to 6 down the center, and if you have a double you want to make sure it's like it's thick enough to get the 2, and then once you have each one lined up, what you do is you set up fresh really, really, really hot, you set up 2 bricks, and then you put the over it, and that's when you start to twist them like this, and as you're cooking them you make sure every single side, the front to back, is and then that's when you can finally and that's how you make babies.
And so the implication is that if the Hellenic ethnicity is one with a divine starting point, a trunk on a family tree, then if we all have similar traits, you know, the ones cartoons like to make fun of us for, does that imply that the gods would have had to have them too? I mean, that's how genealogy works. You don't get a whole bunch of people who all look the same unless their ancestors look the same, right? How do divine genetics work? I'm not particularly religious, and I'm pretty sure that Helen and Zeus didn't actually exist, so I don't really care what they may or may not have looked like. To me, they're just cultural icons, figures, important characters from stories. But what I am interested in is what my ancestors, the ancient Greeks, thought. Did they consider their direct, godly bloodline in their day today? Culturally, was there an understanding that being Greek meant you were a descendant of gods? Helen's sons and grandsons would go on to be eponymous to the major Hellenic ethnic subdivisions and tribes. And some of these guys, they thought that. They even acted on it. Let me tell you about a real thing that happened about 3,000 years ago. Not mythology, history. Idoris, or the Dorians, were one of the 4 main ethnically divided tribes of peoples who would eventually make up the original Hellenic identity. Their exact origins are unclear, but their invasion is literally what marks the line between pre-classical and classical Greece.
The Dorian invasion wasn't so much a violent invasion as it was a cultural and linguistic one brought on by mass migration. Over the span of just a few generations, their ethnicity, dialect, and traditions dominated the Peloponnese, solidifying Idoris as founding members of ancient Greek identity, and obviously part of what makes even someone like me, 3,000 years later, who I am.
Now, what, you might ask, led them to invade Greece in the first place? Well, that's where, as often is the case with ancient Hellenic history, we see mythology directly influence people's perceptions of themselves and their actions. Though, to be fair, I suppose they wouldn't have been the first or the last people to do something crazy on no further grounds than that of their faith. The Dorians weren't just the Dorians, they were also the Heraclidae. See, prior to the invasion and their involvement in the construction of the classical Greek identity, they lived probably in the remote mountainous areas on the outskirts of mainland Greece, far from Athena or the Peloponnesos. Because I'm not particularly spiritual and don't believe that the Greek gods were real, let me commit this act of hubris in suggesting that it was their status as outsiders that probably caused them to begin to draw similarities between themselves and a certain group of famous exiled Greeks from mythology. Over what were likely generations and generations, the Dorians convinced themselves that they were the descendants of the banished Ilos, son of the one and only Heracles.
First, let's get over one stupid roadblock. Yes, it's Heracles, or Heracles, not Hercules. Hercules is his Roman equivalent, and sure, it's similar enough that it could be interchangeable if it weren't for the fact that the structure of the name Heracles is actually significant to his myth. See, the guy was actually born Acclaimed, or Acclides, and that's the name he went by until one day on a rampage he accidentally killed 3 babies. Hera, wife of Zeus, who really wasn't a big fan of Acclides, her husband's latest demigod love child, came to him and basically said, "Hey, you're an idiot, look what you did. I could destroy you now at your weakest state, but instead I'll spare you and change your name to Heracles, meaning glory to Hera, so that if you ever redeem yourself through your trials or whatever, everyone will know it's because of me, because I spared you." And so that's why his name has to be Heracles, not Hercules. If his Latin name incorporated Hera's Roman equivalent, Juno, it'd be acceptable, but as it stands, it just straight up makes no sense and is incompatible with the legend of the origin of his name. So, if you want to be a little shit telling me, "Oh, actually it's Hercules," why don't you fucking choke on a feta cheese, eh?
Anyways, in myth, after the death of Heracles, his children were driven into exile, something they thought was unfair given that after his trials, the land of Sparta, among others, was granted to their father as a divine gift from Zeus and Hera. The Dorians, believing in their Heraclidean ancestry, considered Sparta and the rest of southern Greece their heroic inheritance. They felt like they were destined to reclaim it, and so they started their descent and eventually succeeded. The Dorian invasion is a relatively modern term coined in the 1830s used to describe this event, mostly unconsidered with the mythological aspects of it, in title at least. At the time though, if you were an ancient Greek who lived through it or was tasked with recording its history, like Herodotus, you would have called it something else. The Epistrophe ton Iraklidon, the return of the Heraclids. Anyways, so what does this have to do with Greek identity or ethnicity? The implication of something like this is subtle, but obvious if you read into it. The Dorians, to the rest of Proto-Greek society, Athenians particularly, were their own ethnic subgroup. They would eventually, though, spread their genes throughout and usher in an era of classical Greece from which all modern Greeks descend, and modern Greeks tend to look pretty similar. Heracles wasn't actually a real guy, so there's no conversation to be had about what he looked like, but in creating media about him, developing a fictional story where we're expected to believe in him, then this sort of ancestral claim by the Dorians can't be ignored. If most Greeks, like me, look the same, and if we're supposedly descendants of the Dorians, who themselves, according to their own genealogy, were ancestors of Heracles, and if Heracles himself was a son of Zeus, and, not in the Jesus way, as in Zeus had actual sex and impregnates the mortal princess Alcmene, then Heracles, Zeus, and by extension, most of the rest of this weird Olympian family tree, have to be ethnically Hellenic. In a setting at least where mythology is assumed to be true, then according to it, Zeus, by straight up sexual reproduction, is the source of the Greek ethnicity. He is the ruler of the airspace over Greece, and the ruler of the gene pool of the inside of the Greek people. If you choose to use Greek mythology as the setting for a fictional story, a film, a game, or whatever, then you have no choice but to accept that in that world, because of the actual historical event, the Dorian invasion that led to the foundation of Hellenic identity on the grounds that the first king of Macedonia was literally the great-great-great-grandchild of Heracles, then everyone's favorite demigod, and by paternity Zeus, must resemble Greek people. Of course, none of this is actually real, it's all fairy tale shit. But if you decide that it is real within the bounds of your property, then you don't have a choice unless you're okay with ethnic erasure. Now, Supergiant didn't put Heracles in their game, but they did put his family. And while they did add some ethnic diversity that is fitting for an ancient Greek setting like a Black Athena and a South Asian Dionysus, though again, maybe should have picked literally any other god for that one, they also decided to not design any single character that really stood out as Greek.
For a kind of people notorious for expressing tan skin and black hair a lot, to a degree that artists and SNL skits have been poking fun at it for decades, it's odd to me not to see, in a piece of media that seems to want to celebrate our culture's icons and also general diversity, to not see a single Greek-looking person aside from maybe the main character if you got him in the sun a little bit more, maybe the bull guy, and now that I look at him, maybe the skeleton guy too. That bald plus mullet combo is suspiciously Greekster looking. I'm digging through a pile of bones looking for myself now.
Like I said before, America's idea of white representation, which is what's mostly in this game aside from once per token ethnic/racial characters, is not Greek representation. In other words, Greeks like myself do not feel represented just by seeing an assortment of pale-skinned and pale-haired people who'd be more reflective of a random sample population of white people from California or whatever. In general, this sort of diversity is good. It's progressive, it pleases people, and gives some who often don't get the opportunity to see anyone like themselves in Western media, especially anything as sacred as Greek mythology-related media, their moment of recognition, of inclusion. But that also describes Greek people. Greek people often are not given the opportunity to see themselves in Greek mythology-related media, stuff that would make us look good. We're outcasted by more popular, more good-looking, easier to digest, aka less tanned, less mixed, less brown, Anglosphere actors, or in the case of games, out-designed for them, bad, inconsiderate, and boring imaginings of who we are and who our ancestors were. You can't hold the feta from a Greek salad. That's just tomatoes, cucumbers, and onions. No, we only get to show up on screen as ourselves when we need to accurately mock ourselves, do our little dance so people can see how crazy and wild we are, and then exit. By the sheer number of times it's been done before, nobody sees it as wrong to remove Greeks from Greek mythology, something that can't really be done. Mythology is intertwined with our geography, with our history, and even our ethnicity. Others can be injected into Greek settings, sure. Hades and other modern works have great examples of that, but what you can't do is then leave no space for a single Hellene. It'd be like claiming diversity as a core value of your studio and then making a Christian movie where Jesus and his apostles are all white guys with Southern American accents. I get it, you're more concerned with what you consider diversity, salt sprinkled with a little bit of pepper, than what that means to other people in the world, notably where this game's source material comes from. Diversity that looks more like nutmeg, za'atar, cardamom, maybe some fennel seeds if you're feeling fancy. The problem with focusing more on the social issues you want to commit to helping solve in your way than actually learning the foreign source material you're using is you risk hurting people. No, Heracles is not in the game, but if he had been, that would have been a moment of straight up fuck you. Any other one of these gods you can play around with. In fact, if it's for a progressive end, I encourage it. But Heracles? He holds such an important significance to both the actual, tangible, real history of ancient Greece and the ensuing Hellenic ethnicity that he began that he's not for sharing. He is a closed part of Greek culture. I'm sorry, but he's untouchable. There's a complexity I wish people could learn about ancient interpretations of mythology and the way they shaped the world and culture of the classical period that, even though I understand and agree with the desire to make a more diverse version of the Greek pantheon, because that is definitely good, I believe that version should include Greek people, especially in roles of the supposed founding members of this ethnic group. You cannot ethnic blend Heracles or Zeus, whitewashing them or otherwise, without making an unfortunate commentary on Greek people, that our representation doesn't fucking matter. And that is a really fucked up vibe to commit to when you're otherwise trying to be cool and let as many people in to enjoy your game as possible. Yes, just like Helen, Heracles didn't actually exist, but a group of Proto-Greek people claiming to be Heraclids were real. A group who, at the time, apparently had such a different enough appearance that they were considered their own ethnicity, believed so strongly in their inheritance that they returned to and reclaimed what they considered their holy land, and to whom being ethnically Greek meant being a grandchild of Heracles. Whether true or false that these people were literally his descendants doesn't matter. They believed that they were. And so if that's how they defined Hellenic identity, then Heracles and Dias are not just legendary icons of ancient polytheism or of mythical heroism, they're also inarguably symbols of Greek ethnicity itself. And if you change either of them, or their brothers, or their cousins, or their parents, you are changing Greeks. You are erasing a culture. And I'm sorry, but that's not cool. They're called the Greek gods because they were worshipped in ancient Greece, not because they themselves are ethnically Greek.
Sorry, dude, you got this one wrong. In a world where belief in descendants from these gods is linked to the founding of an ethnicity, then this is categorically untrue and could only be the opinion of someone who hasn't done their homework.
Making either of them anything but olive-skinned, dark-haired, slimy Greeksters to an olive-skinned, dark-haired, slimy Greekster like myself who cares is as dumb as casting Tom Cruise in a samurai flick. Or, not to drag my fellow ethnic voters into this, but it's as dumb as depicting Jesus as anything other than a brown-skinned Middle Eastern Jew. The joke here obviously being both these distinctly ethnic characters have undergone multiple iterations of whitewashing to suit the sensitivities of Western majorities who apparently are so culturally fragile they can't handle foreign icons not looking like they belong to them. And while Heracles is not in the game for whatever reasons, the way they've treated both other gods in this pantheon with no regard for their baggage and also other ethnicities of the diverse cast without realizing that representation on its own is not good enough, context matters, and in fact the wrong context can turn things negative, I am not convinced that had they chosen to include him, that they would have handled this ethnically significant character carefully enough to 1. Not make him blonde for no fucking reason, and 2. Not call him Hercules. So, recap, what did we learn today? Well, we learned that Greek mythology was extremely regional. It was designed by ancient Greeks to explain only the naturally occurring processes and attributes of ancient Greece. Its gods were many, representative of the various cities they oversaw, whose local depictions were reflective of the values of their devotees. There was a sense of regional ownership of their invented divinities. Their gods weren't just rulers of the whole world, but they had a preference. They intervened in these people's daily lives, in these people's environments, in these people's gene pool, and so on. In short, we learned that in the classical era, the links between mythology, geography, history, and ethnicity were strong. And it's exactly that strength that made localized polytheism hard to accept in a world that was ever growing, which is why it lost its fight against Christianity, to a degree. So we've learned here today, or rather let me say, I propose, just to keep you guys out of this in case this goes terribly wrong and it all backfires, that the corroboration provided by the creative director of Hades, which was intended to explain how they confirmed with supposedly canon sources that it was chill to make their cast more diverse, but to me as a Greek person who's seen no meaningful Greek representation in this game understands this instead is just how they excused whitewashing most of their pantheon, as usual, I propose that this is kinda bullshit. All my explanations aside, it's easy to see once you stop using the word Greek and call these people how they call themselves. They're called the Hellenic gods because they were worshipped in Ellada by Hellenes, people who believed they were descendants of Helen and of Heracles and Dias and Prometheus and many more of these funky Party City gods, and so yes, the gods themselves were considered ethnically Greek. And so I'm sorry, but no, it unfortunately doesn't stand to reason that the Greek gods represented all people of the world. The gods are explicitly Greeks because through their horniness, they supposedly created a large portion of the Proto-Greek tribes themselves. In a mythology where the gods fuck, if the gods are Greek, then the people will be Greek. In the end though, what does it fucking matter, right? Diversity and representation in media is important. I know I might have come off with a sarcastic tone throughout this, but I'm not joking, you know? Why can't we just use Greek mythology and Greek culture as a conduit or platform for more diversity and inclusion? I mean, especially in a game like Hades where their myth is already being used as a quick boilerplate for world building and game design, why can't we use it as the canvas it is to also paint our provincialist progressive values on? Because at the end of the day, this is a game made in and mostly for people from North America. Greek people here are just European immigrants like the rest of them, and they're just Christians like all the other white people, right? It's not like there's anything freaky going on behind the scenes, or like they're diverse enough on their own, and it's not like they're lacking accurate or positive representation in media, right? Why don't we just draw over them and their cultural icons in their own world with something, anything different than them? Hell, let's just paint them white. That definitely wouldn't be erasing a whole traumatic history these people had with their identities, with segregatory infrastructure still in place today. That would be great. Then we can make even more space to sprinkle in some token racial characters. If we do that, then people will know for sure that we're being socially responsible and that we're committed to inclusivity. And why would any stupid fucking idiot beg to differ? What reasons could someone possibly have to make the case that actually Greek representation would be good, and that instead doing what we did, as bare-boned and bare-assed as we did it, was actually counterproductive to our values and what we were trying to achieve? I'm the stupid fucking idiot here, FYI. You know, maybe it's easier if I show you. Yeah, you know what, I need to show you guys something. Let's get the fuck out of here for a second. This is Boulevard de l'Acadie, ironically, given what I'm about to show you, named to commemorate the Acadian deportation in the 1700s. Some survivors of that British ethnic cleansing campaign you might know as the French Cajuns of Louisiana, but most live in the Canadian Maritimes these days. In Montreal, though, this boulevard marks the border between two pretty different neighborhoods.
To the west is TMR, the town of Mount Royal, which is such an old money place you could get away with its colloquial English name in an otherwise French province. I also didn't realize this until we came here. It's one of few municipalities in Montreal that has English stop signs. I know that might just sound strange to you. It's hard to kind of express like the meaning of that, like politically and socially. I guess, like, imagine if there was like one little town in Texas that somehow had like unilingual Spanish stop signs. Like that would be like close to the meaning of like a place having only English stop signs in Quebec. It's bananas. Swanky condos, greenery, in-city suburban homes, soccer fields, swimming pools, fountains in the park. It's what you expect from one of the wealthiest areas in the city. To the east is Park X, Park Extension, a neighborhood whose population has been historically ranked as the densest, poorest, and Greekest in Montreal. This is where my grandparents started their lives in this country, where my dad and my aunts grew up. It's 5 times smaller and 10,000 bodies tighter than its neighborhood across the road. I think the satellite photos tell the story for me.
You might be noticing the tall bush on the TMR side. It's weird, right? Especially considering that on the other side, Selwood Street serves the same purpose as Acadie Boulevard. They both go south to north. Why isn't this just another lane?
What gives? Well, that bush wasn't always there, and in fact is only there now to cover up a little secret, one of the most obviously discriminatory pieces of infrastructure we have in Montreal. Though the Greeks have mostly moved on from this place, it continues standing to segregate the city's current generations of immigrants. Now tangled and intertwined in the branches of its concealing bush, the wall, the metal fence that lies between TMR and Park X on Boulevard de l'Acadie, was erected in the 1960s and originally built to keep the Greeks on the other side out of society.
Decades before anyone needed to get on stage and openly say anything about the place of ethnic people in Quebec, this fence stood not only just to physically prevent people from crossing over, but to symbolize the kind of segregation Greeks and other post-war European migrants faced here, the sorts of things that shaped even my own upbringing in this province and will continue to affect mine and others' families until the ruling class decides to decouple people's ethnicities and heritage from which freaking schools they're allowed to go to. This fence and its maintenance was and still is a successful obstacle, a tool of systemic discrimination and an icon of everlasting ethnic segregation.
What it stood for and what it still stands for, and what people, honestly, I think on both sides of it have learned from it, though, is one of the reasons I think that Ubisoft Montreal and the designers and storytellers who work there, just 10 minutes south of here in the Mile End, are one of the only Western game studios that always makes all of their Greek characters exceptionally freaking Greek. Hello and welcome to the Endscreen. It's me, your boy. First of all, I want to say thank you to everybody who recommended, after the tension and stress in game design video, that I pick up longboarding. I finally found a board a couple months ago that could support my fat ass, and I've been having an absolute blast. I thought this would be a really fucking stupid way to do an end screen. So first of all, one thing I want to mention is that nobody's going to be charged on Patreon for this video. The reason that is because evidently, oh Jesus Christ, I think I just ran over a couple of staples. Yeah, sorry. The reason that is because I know that obviously there's some sensitive subject matter covered in this video, and I wouldn't want anybody who's potentially uncomfortable either supporting a video like this or having their name credited as a supporter of a video like this forced to. So for that reason, there's no credits in this video, because I completely understand the situation. In addition, and not that I'm admitting that I feel like I did any harm with this video, more that I understand that there are people who may perceive that I've done harm with this video, I'm going to be making a donation to a local Montreal refugee charity called Refugee Montréal, which basically of the equivalent of whatever I would have made on Patreon plus the first month of ad revenue that I make for this video, which, given the subject matter and the fact that it'll probably be demonetized very quickly, probably probably gonna be like 7 cents. Quebec is a hard place to explain to those who have never experienced it, and being from here immediately places you among some of the least relatable human beings in North America. So I completely understand that some people might not agree with the takes I'm making or agree with really any of the things I've said in this video. Again, what it boils down to is a difference in worldview. I just hope people understand that this video is well thought and well felt from my perspective, and this donation is my attempt at showing that I think my heart is in the right place, and I hope you guys understand. Ooh. Now real quick, one other thing, as you guys have noticed, this is going to be a 2-part video, and the second part I will be charging on Patreon, but I wanted to give you guys a fair warning as to one of the subjects I'm going to be covering, because again, I can understand people not wanting to support a video where I talk about Wicca and by Wicca I mean modern Wicca, and particularly Hellenic Reconstructionist Wicca, the one where, you know, TikTok influencers are encouraging minors to make their own wine in the name of Dionysius, the god I am literally named after, and get botulism. As you can imagine, I'm not talking about Wicca or this sort of modern TikTok witch trend in a very positive light, and so if Wicca is something that matters to you, I can completely understand you maybe not wanting to support this video. Yeah, so fair warning that that is a topic that will be covered, and either look forward to it or get ready to hate my guts even more. I fully have no idea if any of this VO is actually picking up from this microphone, so I may just have to like re-record the Endscreen later on. As always, thank you all so much for your continued support. It really means a lot. You can no doubt tell from the change in seasons that occurred over the course of this video that it took a hell of a long time to get out. So yeah, thank you guys so much, and see you around in part 2. If I don't fucking eat shit in the next 2 seconds. We've reached the point in my YouTube career where I'm making experimental fucking action camera end screens, where I risk life and limb to get you guys the content you so desire. For context, the reason I'm doing this is when you guys recommended me start trying longboarding, I got into it. I figured out, I found a board that worked, I found some wheels that worked, I found some bearings and some trucks that were recommended to me based on my weight, and I'm having a great time. But the thing is, I'm not someone who ever skateboarded when I was in high school, and so the thing with this is I'm so fat it's hard to like pivot. But yeah, I'm not someone who ever learned how to do this back when it was like cool to be skateboarding, and so I was very worried of like looking like an idiot going out like in public during the daytime. Which is the reason that I find strange parking lots late at night. It's now 10:47 p.m. I find strange parking lots near local community centers, and I go skateboarding late at night, just getting used to everything, and I've gotten pretty good. For someone who weighs as much as I do and picked up skateboarding at my age, I feel pretty happy with my ability to just like carve a little bit. That's so much fun. Anyways, see you guys next time. Bye-bye.